Robert Baratheon was not a man often stricken by doubts, least of all when he lay sprawled on his deathbed. Groaning as pain lanced across his belly, he clutched at the blood-spattered sheets with a trembling hand. King's Landing hummed with chaos beyond the doors of the royal bedchamber. Men wearing the crowned stag of House Baratheon hurried in and out. Whispers of treachery filled the corridors of the Red Keep. Outside, the sun sank low behind the spires, turning the sky to molten gold. Yet in that bedchamber time stood still. Cersei hovered near the corner, all cold green eyes and parted lips, anxious for him to finally expire. Varys drifted like a specter along the wall, hands tucked within voluminous sleeves. Grand Maester Pycelle stooped at the bedside, muttering useless reassurances. Littlefinger's slender figure lingered behind them, his sly face unreadable. Renly, Robert's youngest brother, lingered in the shadows, lips pressed tight, perhaps already plotting how he might seize the throne once Robert drew his last breath. And there, bearing equal parts sorrow and determination, stood Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, imprisoned just hours before, but at Robert's dying command, allowed one final audience with the king he had once called friend. Robert's breath came in quick, shallow rasps. He felt the hot ache of poison in his gut. He blamed the boar's tusk, the huntsman's carelessness, and his own thirst for wine. Through bleary eyes, he looked at Ned, that tall, somber figure with gray eyes and grim mouth. Ned was shackled at the wrists, the iron links rattling every time he moved. A hush stretched between them as the watchers wondered if the king still had sense enough to speak. Robert coughed, a wet, racking noise, and lifted his hand with the heavy signet ring that once symbolized all the power in the Seven Kingdoms. "Gods be good," he murmured, voice thick. "You look like you've just crawled out of a grave, Ned." Ned attempted a wry smile, but it looked more like a grimace. "Your Grace." There was so much to say. Time was short. In the corridor, the guards waited, and Cersei's green eyes flickered from Robert to Ned and back again as if she suspected some final scheme. Robert's face twisted in agony, and he coughed again, fresh blood spattering his lips. It took every ounce of will for him to speak. "I'm dying," Robert rasped. "The boar got me good. Or maybe it was just my own damn stupidity." He snorted, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "But I'll not let the realm descend into a pit of vipers while I still draw breath. Not if I can help it." He beckoned Ned closer, ignoring Cersei's protest as she tried to place herself between her husband and the prisoner. Renly stepped forward too, but Robert shot him such a venomous glare that even the brash young lord hesitated. With obvious pain, Robert reached for a scrap of parchment on the table beside his bed, then struggled to close his thick fingers around a quill. Grand Maester Pycelle offered assistance, but Robert waved him off. Ned's heart hammered. He had come here hoping to speak truth, to name Cersei's children as bastards born of incest, to safeguard the realm from the Lannisters. But his imprisonment for treason, Joffrey's claim, and the power the Queen wielded, all of it weighed heavily on him. He could smell the stench of death wafting from the king's bed, see the final glimmer in Robert's eyes. "Ned," the king said, his voice thick with regret, "I should have listened to you sooner. I should never have allowed that snake's nest in King's Landing to fester. But it's too late for me now." His glassy eyes flicked to Cersei. "You, get out." He wheezed, and for the briefest moment, the queen looked outraged. But perhaps she feared the blowback if she defied a king in his final hour. Reluctantly, she withdrew, beckoning the others to follow. They all retreated. Littlefinger, Pycelle, and even Renly, though he cast a last glance at Robert. Varys, silent and watchful, gave a small bow and slipped out behind them, leaving only 2 Kingsguard posted by the door. Robert glowered at those white-cloaked knights. "You too," he commanded, and with uncertain glances they obeyed. All who remained was Ned Stark, his manacles, and the dying king. Robert's breath came in ragged gasps, but he forced himself upright. "Now," he said, "we can speak freely." Ned felt a powerful ache, a weight in his heart. This was his old friend, the man he had fought alongside during the rebellion, the man who had once been so full of life, laughter, and unstoppable fury. In the flickering lamplight, Robert's face looked sunken and gray, a death mask. Still, an old spark danced in his eyes, a final flicker of that unquenchable Baratheon will. "I need to set things right, Ned," he said. "I should have done it years ago. I'm no fool. I know about your boy, Jon." Ned's pulse thundered in his ears. Ice-cold dread trickled along his spine. How could Robert possibly know the truth of Jon Snow? Surely he must not know the secret. Or perhaps he had discovered only that the boy was Ned's bastard. Robert groaned as he lifted his hand, bidding Ned to speak, but Ned remained silent. "Don't look at me like that," Robert croaked. "You were always a damned terrible liar. I suspected you had reasons, deeper than you ever said, for not letting the boy come south." Sweat beaded on Robert's brow. "Perhaps I never wanted to delve too deep, for fear of what I might find. But you are my friend. Was my friend." A half-smile twitched at his lips. "I would have forgiven you anything, Ned, even fathering a bastard. I had plenty of bastards myself, by gods. But your boy, he's a Northman, a Stark. And, by the old gods, if only you had told me sooner, I might have done something. Maybe if I had recognized him." Ned's shackles rattled as he stepped nearer. "Jon is my son, my disgrace," he said, voice hoarse. "He is a good lad. Please, Robert, this is not a matter you need burden yourself with." But Robert let out a rattling laugh that dissolved into a choking cough. When he recovered, he fixed Ned with a stare. "If things were different," the king wiped blood from his lips, "I would see the boy recognized. He is yours, Ned, but I claim him too, for you have always been my brother as well as my friend. Give him a better name than Snow. Winter is coming, yes, but so is war. The realm needs a Stark and a Baratheon both." He coughed again, spitting red droplets onto his sheets. "So as my final command, I'll do it. On this document." With shaking hands, Robert held up a parchment. Ned blinked, heart pounding. It was a royal decree, hastily written in the spidery scrawl of Pycelle's handwriting. It bore the royal signature and seal, though the ink was smudged. Ned could only read a few lines from where he stood, but the gist was clear. Robert was legitimizing Jon Snow, naming him a trueborn Stark of Winterfell, and Ned's eyes widened. He was also naming the boy heir to the true friendship and lineage of House Baratheon. A strange, half-finished clause that would tie him to Robert's line in a way that was neither purely Stark nor purely Baratheon. It seemed to unify claims in some twisted legal sense, though the words were not perfectly clear. "This is madness," Ned finally managed. "He is only a boy, and you are gravely ill. Joffrey is your son." "Don't speak of Joffrey," Robert snarled, eyes flashing with a hateful glint. "He isn't mine. The seed is strong, yes, but not in that abomination. I should have listened to you about the Lannisters. It's too late, though. Let them claim what they will, but I'll be damned if I leave the realm in that boy's hands. Better your bastard than Cersei's spawn." He coughed again. "The realm remembers the Targaryen madness. It does not deserve Lannister madness in its place." "But what of your brothers?" Ned asked. "Renly, Stannis, they are your trueborn kin." Robert let out a bitter bark of laughter, cut short by pain. "Renly is too eager, too rash, and Stannis. 7 hells, I love my brother, but gods help us, the man is as rigid as a castle wall. If the realm would bend to him, we might not fare so ill, but who can say? No, Ned, I want a check. A balance. If Joffrey claims the Iron Throne, or Renly and Stannis make their own claims, I want to recognize Stark Baratheon in the mix. I want to give the realm an option that you and I can trust. Even if the boy is but a child, you must shape him, Ned. Promise me." Ned's lips parted, but no words came. He thought of Jon, the quiet boy with dark hair and solemn eyes, left behind at Winterfell. The boy had no knowledge of the swirl of politics, nor that his father was not who he claimed. Now Robert wanted to brand him with legitimacy, to tie House Stark's claim to the Baratheon line. A wave of dread and sorrow threatened to crush Ned's heart, but he saw the pure determination in Robert's gaze. This was the final wish of a dying man. "I promise," Ned said at last, voice rough. "I will do what I can to protect him, to guide him. But I beg you, Robert, do not let my imprisonment stand. My family?" "Gods, Ned," Robert whispered. "I never wanted you locked up. It was the Lannisters' doing, or that fool council. You'll be freed, but I have so little time left. The city is a nest of vipers. By the time Pycelle and I prepared this decree, it was almost too late. Save our friendship at least, and do what is right when I'm gone." An anguished breath left Ned's lips. "I will, if the gods allow." Robert nodded weakly, passing the parchment to Ned so he could see the words more clearly. Indeed, the lines were scrawled, half done, but the key portion was there. "By the grace of the gods, Robert of the House Baratheon, the first of his name, King of the Undulls and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, does hereby legitimize Jon Snow, bastard son of Lord Eddard Stark, granting him the name Jon Stark with all the privileges, rights, and dignities that accompany that birth. Further does name him a recognized scion to the friendship and lineage of House Baratheon, to stand as a possible heir or close ally to the Iron Throne, until such a time as conflict is resolved." It was incomplete, the product of a man in too much pain to finish properly, but it bore the royal seal, that much was clear. And the seal was unbroken, meaning no one had read it except Robert and Pycelle, who had probably done so reluctantly. At the bottom was Robert's shaky signature. The black ink had bubbled in places, as though dripped from a trembling hand. It was official enough to be disastrous in the wrong eyes. Ned could only stare at it. "Take it," Robert said, forcing the parchment into Ned's shackled hands. "Keep it safe. Pycelle wrote it under my command, but I fear the Queen's creatures will destroy it if they find it. If they try to kill you or kill the boy, use it to rally the North or rally my loyal bannermen." A feeble grin shaped Robert's lips. "Swear you'll protect the realm, Ned. Swear it." Ned closed his eyes, tears threatening. He felt the edges of the parchment under his fingertips, as real as the shackles on his wrists. "I swear it," he said softly. Robert's entire body shook as he leaned back against his pillows. His mouth opened as if to speak again, but only a wet, rattling noise emerged. He coughed once, a great gush of blood staining his beard, and then his massive frame went still. Ned's heart clenched. The king was gone, his eyes staring emptily at the ceiling. Chaos descended immediately after. When Ned shouted for help, Cersei and the guards rushed in, with Pycelle tottering behind them. Cersei's expression flickered from shock to something like triumph. Joffrey, alerted by someone, barreled into the chamber, shouting to see his father. Renly and Littlefinger forced their way in. Ned found himself seized by gold-cloaked guards, the parchment nearly torn from his grasp. But he managed to slip it inside his tunic, hugging it tight to his chest as though it were a shield. Cersei barked an order, and the King's Guard wrenched Ned's arms back. In the confusion, no one seemed to notice the stiff parchment pressed against his undershirt. Pycelle tried to check Robert's pulse, but the man was clearly gone. The bedchamber echoed with wailing and shouting, Joffrey screaming that he was the king now, that traitors would be punished. No one realized that in those final moments, Robert Baratheon had bestowed a gift that might change the course of the realm's history. By the time the city bells tolled the death of the king, Ned Stark had been locked away again in the black cells, deeper and darker than before. Yet the parchment remained with him, a silent promise Robert had made, for better or worse. Word spread like wildfire through King's Landing. King Robert was dead, and Joffrey Baratheon was king. The Lannisters took swift control. The small council was reshuffled. Grand Maester Pycelle bent the knee, as did many others. Sansa Stark, still in Cersei's clutches, pleaded for her father's life. Varys tried to counsel caution, but the spider's webs were tangled. The realm braced for a war of succession. Down in the black cells, Ned Stark was left in darkness. Days passed, or weeks, he lost all sense of time. When he dared pull out that parchment, A single guttering torch provided him light enough to make out the words. Jon Snow legitimized the potential claim on the Iron Throne, or at least a recognized tie to the Baratheon line. He wondered if it would be enough to protect his son, or if the realm would simply tear itself apart, ignoring Robert's final wish. Eventually, with Sansa's pleas and the Lannisters' desire to quell a northern rebellion, they dragged Ned before the crowds at the September of Baelor. He had intended to speak the truth. He had intended to name Joffrey a bastard, to reveal that Stannis was Robert's lawful heir, to stand firm. But they had Sansa and maybe Arya too. The memory of the parchment weighed on him. Would it matter if he died here with a defiant last stand? Or should he buy time in the hope that word might reach the north about Jon's legitimacy? And so Ned Stark chose dishonor, announcing for all the city that he was a traitor, that Joffrey was the rightful king. The crowds jeered him. Joffrey preened, perched on the Iron Throne. Cersei smirked behind him. Sansa sobbed, believing her father might yet be spared. Ned hoped his daughter would be safe, that somehow the Lannisters would keep to the terms, that he might be sent to the Wall or exiled. But Joffrey, flushed with power and sadism, changed the plan. He demanded Ned Stark's head. Before the horrified eyes of the city, Island Payne brought the sword down. Sansa screamed, and Ned Stark's world went black. The last thing he clutched before the blow was a fleeting thought of Winterfell, of Catelyn and his children, of the parchment hidden in the lining of his tunic, its edges pressed against his ribs. The blow severed his head from his body. They left him to die there on the steps of the Great September, in front of the masses. And in that moment, many believed that the last true barrier between the Lannisters and total domination had been wiped away. But Ned Stark had not been the only one who'd known about Robert's final command. An old man in maester's robes had glimpsed it, and rumor had spread of a secret decree sealed with the royal crest. Lord Varys's little birds had whispered of a certain bastard in the north, who might become something else entirely. Up in Winterfell, Jon Snow never suspected a thing. He carried on with his daily tasks, training in the yard with a wooden sword, or tending to the ravens with Maester Luwin, or listening with half an ear to Robb's conversations about the gathering storm in the south. The news of Ned Stark's imprisonment had reached them, followed swiftly by word of King Robert's death. Then, on that fateful day, a raven arrived, bringing the horrifying truth. Eddard Stark was executed for treason under the command of King Joffrey. Robb Stark roared with fury. The northern lords erupted in anger. Catelyn Stark broke down in tears, a keening wail of grief that echoed through the halls. Sansa was a hostage in King's Landing, Arya missing. And that very day, Robb called the banners, summoning the might of the North. They would march south for vengeance, for justice, for Ned Stark. The Riverlands might join them, since Catelyn was Tully-born. Jon Snow stood in the courtyard when news reached him. He felt the world tilt, as if the ground beneath his feet had vanished. Lord Eddard had been more than just the man who raised him. He was the father Jon had known all his life, the father who'd offered him kindness, if not the warmth extended to Robb or Sansa. Suddenly, tears blurred Jon's vision. He was alone in a world turned upside down. That night, he lay awake in the cramped bed he shared with no one, going over every memory he had of Ned Stark. The few small smiles, the rare words of approval, the instructions on how to seat a blade in the scabbard, how to speak the truth even when it was hard. And now that man was gone. The North responded in full. Lord Serwyn, Tallheart, Glover, and Umber all answered the call. The Great Jon roared at the idea of avenging Ned. Winterfell's courtyard teemed with mail-clad men, boots stomping across the cobblestones as they prepared to march. Jon Snow felt lost among them. He was only a bastard, he told himself, not a Stark in truth. He had no place at Robb's war councils. The best he could do was volunteer to fight in the ranks or, an unspoken thought whispered, perhaps join the Night's Watch as many bastards did. That had been his earlier plan, to find honor wearing the black. But everything was uncertain. Robb Stark, not yet named king in the north, still only a young lord, found Jon in the Godswood the next day. Robb's eyes were rimmed red from tears, but determination set his jaw. The direwolf Grey Wind stalked at his side, hackles raised, as if sensing the tension in the air. "Jon," Robb began, voice soft. "We march south soon. The men are almost ready. I know you grieve. We all do. But I would have you come with us." Jon swallowed. "Me? I am no Stark, Robb. You know that." "Shut up. You are my brother," Robb growled, a flash of anger in his eyes. "And Father," his voice broke. "Father would want you with us. You have trained, you can fight. Gods know we need men we can trust." Jon opened his mouth to respond, but suddenly Theon Greyjoy stepped into the clearing, wearing a cocky grin. "He wants you to come, Snow. That's a compliment of the highest order. Don't be a fool and refuse." Jon frowned at Theon, but felt a stirring of conflicted emotion. He yearned to avenge Ned, to protect his sisters, to stand with his family. But he also worried he had no right. Bastards had no place in the line of inheritance or leadership. His presence might stir rumors or resentment. Yet the desire to do something burned in his chest. "I will come," Jon said quietly at last. "For Lord Eddard." Robb clapped a hand on Jon's shoulder. "Good. We leave in a fortnight." He turned to go, then paused. "And if you call yourself not a Stark one more time, I'll knock you on your back. You're my brother, Jon. Don't forget it." With that, Robb strode away. Jon stood alone beneath the ancient weirwood, its red leaves whispering in the breeze. The face carved in the trunk gazed down on him, as though judging. Jon thought he glimpsed sorrow in those dark, dead eyes. He had never felt more uncertain about the future. Catelyn Stark, for her part, regarded Jon with guarded courtesy. Even in grief, she could not fully let go of her resentment toward Ned's bastard. But with her husband dead, with Bran and Rickon so young, with Sansa and Arya's fates unknown, her priority was to support Robb and do what was best for the family. She tolerated Jon's presence, acknowledging quietly to herself that Ned would have wanted the boy protected. And so the North prepared for war. Ravens flew to the Riverlands. Word came back that Tywin Lannister was already on the march, burning villages in his path, that Jaime Lannister was at Riverrun. All the while, men formed ranks under the Stark banner, the Grey Direwolf on a field of white. When they finally departed, the host was large, near 20,000. Jon rode with the men-at-arms, clad in simple mail, long sword at his hip. He felt out of place among so many knights and lords, but the men near him recognized that he was close kin to Robb, and that alone afforded him some respect. Ghost, Jon's albino direwolf, padded silently at his side, a fierce companion no man dared mock. The march south was long and punishing. Whispers abounded. Some said Stannis Baratheon was raising his banner at Dragonstone, claiming the Iron Throne by right of being Robert's eldest brother. Others rumored that Renly Baratheon had fled King's Landing to muster support in the Reach. And then there were the terrifying stories of Joffrey's cruelty, how he kept Sansa Stark as a hostage, how he had Ned Stark's head on a pike. Jon clenched his fists whenever he heard that particular rumor. But none of them knew that, far away in King's Landing, an unremarkable scrap of parchment had been spirited away. The same parchment that would, if revealed at the right time, legitimize Jon Snow as Jon Stark, recognized by the late King Robert as more than a simple bastard. Cersei had no inkling of that detail, though she sensed something amiss. She could not find any official will from Robert, except a half-finished letter naming Eddard Stark as regent, which she had promptly burned. She was certain Robert must have had other directives, so she questioned Pycelle, pressed him, threatened him, but the old man feigned ignorance, or perhaps told half-truths. She interrogated Varys, who offered vague shrugs. Littlefinger claimed no knowledge. Furious, Cersei redoubled her hold on King's Landing. She placed her father Tywin as Hand of the King, in absentia, for Tywin was busy waging war. She crowned Joffrey in a grand ceremony. The realm teetered on the brink. Meanwhile, in the Riverlands, the Stark host crossed the Neck, forging alliances with houses Frey, Tully, Mallister. Catelyn met with Walder Frey at the Twins, forging a precarious arrangement in exchange for allowing passage. The Great John declared Robb the Young Wolf, hailing him as the North's rightful leader. Jon Snow rode among them, quiet, determined, wrestling with grief and anger. In the gloom of a war camp, while the armies mustered near Moat Cailin, Jon found himself alone by the campfire with Maester Luwin, who had come along to advise Robb. The old maester's hair was thinning, and lines of worry creased his brow. He warmed his hands at the fire and turned to Jon with a studious gaze. "You are troubled," Luwin observed gently. "Do you fear battle?" Jon shrugged, trying to appear braver than he felt. "Of course, but that's not all." He exhaled, the breath fogging in the chill air. "I miss him. I miss Father. And there's a part of me that wonders why he never told me anything of my mother. Why he kept that secret from me right to the end. What if I never learn the truth?" Luwin's expression was sympathetic. Lord Eddard was a man of many secrets in some respects. "But he loved you." Jon nodded, silent for a long while. Then he spoke in a near whisper. "If there was something more to my birth, I wish he had told me. Perhaps it could have changed something. Anything. I feel powerless." The old maester laid a hand on Jon's shoulder. "You are not powerless. Even a bastard has a will, can make choices that sway men's hearts. Honor your father by living well, by protecting your family. That is what Ned Stark would have wanted." Jon gazed into the flames. He could almost see images there. A sword, a crown, a direwolf snarling, and a raven with black wings. The future was uncertain, but the only path he saw was forward, onward to war. They marched, clashed with Tywin's outriders, and advanced deeper into the Riverlands. Robb, guided by cunning and aided by his mother's advice, split his forces to lure Tywin's army away while he engaged Jaime Lannister at Riverrun. Theon Greyjoy, the Great John, Roose Bolton, and others formed the Northern Command. Jon rode among them, uncertain yet resolute, scanning each horizon for foes. Ghost padded beside the cavalry, eerily silent. It was near the Whispering Wood that Jaime Lannister's host was caught unawares. Robb Stark unleashed his trap, and battle erupted. Jon's first taste of real war came that night, and it was both terrifying and exhilarating. He fought desperately, blocking a spear thrust that nearly took his life. He struck back, hacking down a Lannister man-at-arms. Blood splattered his face. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Steel clashed on steel. He almost lost sight of Ghost in the tumult. The battle ended in victory for the North. Jaime Lannister was taken captive, further fueling the legend of the young wolf. Jon, breathing raggedly, realized with shock that he had survived. In the aftermath, as they gathered prisoners and tended the wounded, Jon roamed among the carnage, numb. The reek of death filled his nostrils. He found Robb, who stood over Jaime, the Kingslayer bound in chains, sneering. That night, the Stark bannermen roared with triumph around their fires. Robb remained grim, determined. Catelyn arrived soon after with relief etched on her face. Ser Brynden Tully and Edmure Tully assured them of Riverrun's safety. But the war was far from over. Tywin still roamed to the east with a large force. Joffrey held the throne in King's Landing, and Sansa was a hostage. Days later, word reached the northern camp that Renly Baratheon had declared himself king, forging an alliance with House Tyrell by marrying Margaery Tyrell. He commanded a vast army. Meanwhile, Stannis claimed he was the rightful heir. The realm was fracturing. They called it the War of the Five Kings. Joffrey, Robb, Stannis, Renly, and even Balon Greyjoy in the Iron Islands had begun stirring. None spoke of a supposed Jon Stark. If rumors existed, they were overshadowed by the claims of far more prominent lords. It seemed that Robert's final decree was lost or destroyed. Ned Stark was dead. If the parchment still existed, it slept in silence, carrying the potential to upend the entire realm if it fell into the right hands. In truth, the battered scrap of parchment lay hidden in a trunk, confiscated from Ned Stark's remains. One of the gold cloaks had found it tucked in the tunic after the execution, recognized the royal seal, and brought it discreetly to the Red Keep hoping for reward. There it had passed into the hands of Littlefinger, Peter Baelish, who quietly slipped it into his own hidden stash of secrets. He took one glance, recognized its import, and realized how dangerous it might be. For now, he would keep it close, using it if the time proved advantageous. Thus, Jon Snow remained unaware of the momentous shift that might await him. Instead, the war continued. Robb marched from victory to victory in the Riverlands, becoming a legend in the eyes of his men. The Lannisters consolidated at Harrenhal and along the Trident, striking back when they could. The repeated news of violence, rapine, and pillaging sickened Jon, but the memory of his father spurred him on. Then came the day the Northern Lords bent the knee to Robb Stark, proclaiming him king in the North. It was a grand ceremony in the Great Hall of Riverrun, lit by torches and echoing with fealty. The great Jon roared, brandishing his sword, as each lord swore loyalty. Jon stood among the crowd, heart pounding. King in the North. The war had become something else entirely. A fight for northern independence, a complete break from the Iron Throne. A part of Jon thrilled to see Robb recognized for his leadership and valor. Another part of him felt a distant pang, as though something in the world had shifted in ways that might isolate him even further. If Robb was king in the North, then who was Jon Snow? A bastard with no official place in this new realm? The question haunted him, though he tried to focus on the needs of the present. In King's Landing, Joffrey tortured Sansa with humiliations, forcing her to gaze upon her father's rotting head on a spike, though eventually Cersei had it removed. Tyrion Lannister arrived to serve as Hand of the King in Tywin's absence, trying to bring a measure of reason to court. Varys, watching quietly, kept an ear to the ground. The war of claims raged across the land. Littlefinger bided his time. He played his usual dangerous games with the city's finances, with the brothels, with the alliances that might tip the balance. He studied the scrap of parchment bearing Robert's seal. It was an official decree that the king wished to legitimize Jon Snow as Jon Stark and recognize some tie to House Baratheon. Littlefinger's mind whirled with possibilities. Perhaps he could deliver this to Stannis or Renly, sowing chaos. Perhaps he could deliver it to the northern host and watch them turn away from Robb's cause in confusion. But the result was unpredictable. For now, he did nothing, only gleaning the advantage of possessing a hidden piece on the game board. Weeks became months. Battles raged across the Riverlands. Winterfell was left vulnerable, giving Theon Greyjoy the vile notion of capturing it for his father's favor. Meanwhile, far to the west, the rumors claimed Daenerys Targaryen had hatched dragons across the Narrow Sea, but that felt like a distant tale, barely relevant to the warring kings in Westeros. In Robb Stark's war camp near the crag, on a chilly evening, Jon Snow sat by a low-burning fire, exhausted from the day's skirmishes. He'd clashed with Lannister outriders and nearly lost his life once more, saved only by the intervention of Grey Wind. Dried blood stained the edges of his cloak. He poked at the embers, trying to banish the memory of the dead man's final scream. Robb approached him, wearing his crown of bronze and iron, no longer just a brother but a king. Behind him walked Catelyn Stark, her auburn hair streaked with gray. They both regarded Jon with a blend of concern and sorrow. "Jon," Robb began, standing over him, "we've had word from the north. Theon took Winterfell, Bran and Rickon." He broke off, swallowing, grief twisting his features. He could barely continue. "They say the boys are dead." Jon's world reeled. The iron poker slipped from his grasp, clanging on the ground. "No," he croaked. "That can't be true. Theon, he was our ward. He wouldn't." But even as he said it, he knew Theon's pride and ambition ran deep. Could he have done such a monstrous deed? Catelyn placed a trembling hand on Robb's shoulder. "We do not know all the details, but we cannot disregard the reports. I'm sorry, Jon. For all of us." Jon closed his eyes, fury and grief battling in his heart. First Ned, now possibly Bran and Rickon. Sansa and Arya lost to King's Landing. The very foundations of House Stark were crumbling. He saw the same despair on Robb's face. Yet the weight of kingship forced Robb to remain steady. "What do we do?" Jon asked hollowly. I will continue my war, Robb said, glancing toward a tent where his bannermen argued over tactics. But perhaps you can lead a small force north to see what can be done for Winterfell. We cannot let Theon hold our home, especially if there is any chance the boys yet live. Jon hesitated, torn between the desire to remain at Robb's side and the pull of Winterfell. He had grown up there, though overshadowed by his trueborn siblings. It was still his home. Something deep within him demanded that he go back, that he see the truth for himself. I'll do it, he said, rising to his feet. Give me whatever men you can spare, and I will take back Winterfell or die trying. Catelyn nodded, though the lines of worry deepened on her face. Robb clasped Jon's forearm. Thank you, brother, he said, voice thick with emotion. The North remembers. Winterfell must not remain in Ironborn hands. Thus it was decided. Soon, Jon Snow led a company of a few hundred men northward, riding hard to reclaim the seat of House Stark. Ghost loped at his side, red eyes gleaming in the dusk. Jon felt fear, anger, and a grim resolve. The journey was long, fraught with rumors of burned villages, of Theon's uncertain rule. Along the way, Jon tried to steel himself for what he might find. When they finally approached the walls of Winterfell, the banners of the Kraken flew. Theon's Ironborn patrolled the battlements. Smoke curled from within, as though some part of the fortress had been set ablaze. Jon's heart squeezed at the sight of his childhood home despoiled. He remembered running through those corridors, listening to old Nan's stories near the hearth. This was an abomination. That night, Jon and his men launched a sudden assault. They scaled the walls under cover of darkness, aided by friendly faces inside who had resisted Theon's tyranny. Fighting erupted in the courtyard, clangor echoing off the stone. Jon, sword in hand, cut down 2 Ironborn who tried to bar his path. He glimpsed Hodder, the gentle giant, carrying a child through the chaos. Was that Bran? Could it be? But then a swirl of battle separated them. Eventually, Theon's forces were overwhelmed. The Ironborn had grown complacent, few in number, and they lacked the discipline to hold Winterfell against a determined assault. As dawn broke, the Kraken banner was torn down. Theon Greyjoy was found trying to hide in the crypts, accompanied by a few loyal men. A sword fight erupted in that dark, torchlit space among the tombs of Stark ancestors. Jon confronted Theon directly, Ghost snarling at his side. Theon raised his hands, trembling, fear in his eyes. Jon, wait. I never wanted this, Theon pleaded, voice cracking. They said I had to prove myself. My father demanded it. Jon stared at him, face grim. Where are Bran and Rickon? Theon swallowed hard, words tumbling from his lips in a desperate rush. I didn't kill them. I let them go. The bodies we showed were 2 farm boys. It was the only way to keep control. Bran and Rickon fled. I swear I don't know where they are. A swirl of relief, anger, and disgust churned in Jon. He glanced around at the tombs. The stony faces of ancient Stark lords bore silent witness. Theon had not actually murdered the Stark boys, but had still done monstrous deeds. He had seized Winterfell, forced loyalty from its people, beheaded Ser Roderick Castle, terrorized the castle. Jon's sword trembled in his grasp as he considered executing Theon. Ghost growled. You betrayed us, Jon said hoarsely. You betrayed Robb, you betrayed the family that raised you. I should kill you. Tears shone in Theon's eyes. He looked every inch the coward at that moment, no longer the arrogant youth who once boasted in Winterfell's halls. Jon, please. With a snarl, Jon swung the pommel of his sword into Theon's temple, knocking him unconscious. He did not want to kill a helpless man, even one who deserved punishment. Let Robb decide Theon's fate. Let the king in the north choose. They took Theon captive and expelled the remaining Ironborn. The people of Winterfell emerged, weary but relieved, hugging and weeping. The castle stood in partial ruin, walls blackened by fire, collapsed timbers in some of the halls. The direwolf banners were raised again. That night, A subdued celebration took place in the great hall. Though many seats were empty, many hearts heavy. Jon walked the corridors he once knew so well, overwhelmed by memories. He felt no joy in the victory, only relief that Winterfell was back under Stark control. Stark in all but name, for he was still Jon Snow, no true lord. In the following days, Jon organized repairs, had ravens sent to Robb detailing their success, and launched scouting parties to search for Bran and Rickon. Hodor was nowhere to be found, nor were the Reeds. It seemed they had fled into the wilderness beyond the castle walls. Jon prayed to the old gods that the children still lived. As the weeks passed, the northern men trickled back to Winterfell, fortifying the keep. Reports said that Robb had gone west to fight the Lannisters, that the Freys muttered about broken betrothals, that everything was still in chaos. Jon settled into a strange position of leadership, overseeing day-to-day matters in Winterfell's name while King Robb remained at war. The villagers and castle servants looked to him. Even Lady Catelyn, upon arriving from Riverrun a month later, recognized that Jon had protected Winterfell and kept the people safe. Though her eyes still carried that old resentment, she offered him a nod of acknowledgement. Then one day, a raven arrived from King's Landing, bearing the seal of Lord Petyr Baelish. Jon found it curious that such a man would write to him, but the letter was addressed to Lord Jon Stark of Winterfell. At first, he assumed it was just a mocking form of address, but as he read the contents, his heart pounded. Littlefinger's words were shrouded in politeness and half-truths. "My dear Lord Stark, if you will forgive the presumption, I trust this letter finds you in good health, and that Winterfell stands as proud as ever. I have recently come into possession of a certain document bearing the royal seal, which I believe may be of utmost interest to you. It pertains to matters of legitimacy and inheritance, signed by the late King Robert Baratheon. Gods rest his soul. Should you wish to discuss its significance, please know that I am prepared to facilitate a discreet exchange. One never knows what small pieces of paper might reshape the destiny of kings. With warmest regards and unwavering friendship, Lord Petyr Baelish." Jon read it over and over. The gist was clear. There was a document that might legitimize him, something Robert Baratheon had signed. Could that be true? He remembered the rumors that Ned Stark had uncovered certain truths about Joffrey's parentage. But how and why would Robert legitimize Jon Snow? Jon had never heard even a whisper of such a plan. Yet the letter's language was unmistakable. He brought the letter to Lady Catelyn and Maester Luwin. Catelyn's face paled as she read it, her eyes snapping with suspicion. "Baelish is a snake," she warned. "He betrayed your father in King's Landing. He cannot be trusted." Luwin adjusted his chain collar. "That may be so, my lady, but if what he says is true, this is a matter of huge significance. If Jon is indeed legitimized—" He trailed off, exchanging a glance with Jon. Jon's stomach churned. He was not sure he wanted to be legitimized, especially not by Robert Baratheon's decree. Felt too surreal. He had always been a bastard, a Snow. The name was a badge of shame he had learned to bear. Yet a spark of longing flickered in him. A longing to truly belong, to be recognized as Ned Stark's son. Was it possible that his father had arranged this? Or had Robert done it on his own? Catelyn's expression hardened. "This could be a trap to sow discord between you and Robb. Or it might be a tool to manipulate the North. We cannot rush into anything." Jon frowned. He did not want to usurp Robb's authority. Robb was king in the North. Jon had no desire to disrupt that. But he also thought of the realm of the swirl of claims to the Iron Throne of the horrors in Fly. Ted by Joffrey, the intrigues of Stannis and Renly. If Robert had truly left behind some decree linking Jon to the Baratheon line, it might hold weight. It might be used against Joffrey, might help free Sansa, or it might bring destruction on Winterfell. He stared at the letter again, a single scrap of parchment. He recalled the night in the Godswood, how he'd told Maester Luwin he felt powerless. If this was real, it might be power, dangerous and double-edged. At length, Jon found his voice. "What do you advise?" he asked quietly. Catelyn's lips pressed thin. "We should inform Robb. Let him decide." Maester Luwin nodded. The rightful king of the north should be aware. This must not be done in secret. Jon agreed. Yes, we'll send a raven to Robb at once. And so they did. The message flew south, bearing news of Littlefinger's claim. Jon resumed his duties, trying to put the matter out of his mind, though it haunted him at night. He found himself in the crypts again, standing before Ned Stark's tomb. The memory of his father's face filled him with sorrow. If only he could ask for advice. If only he could ask if Robert's decree was real. Days passed. Then a raven returned from Robb, commanding Jon to come south and meet him at the camp near the twins. Robb wrote that he wanted to see this letter for himself, to speak face to face. Jon prepared to ride out, leaving a trustworthy captain in charge of Winterfell's garrison. Lady Catelyn, still mourning the presumed deaths of Bran and Rickon, chose to remain behind, hoping her boys might yet return. She gave Jon a parting glance as if to say, "This is in your hands now." She did not speak kindly, but there was no open resentment. Perhaps grief and war had softened old hatreds, or perhaps she feared the alternative if the letter proved true. Jon traveled with a small escort, Ghost by his side. The northern roads were rough, scattered with signs of conflict, burned-out inns, abandoned farmsteads. The war had touched every corner of the land. At one point, a group of bandits tried to ambush them, but Ghost snarling and Jon's men-at-arms fought them off swiftly. When they reached the twins, Walder Frey grudgingly allowed them passage. They found Robb in his war tent amid a sea of Northern and Riverlands banners. Tension rippled through the camp. The moment Jon entered the tent, he felt the swirling weight of responsibility. Robb sat behind a rough-hewn table, wearing a crown, his young face etched with hard lines. "You came," Robb said, rising. He gestured to the others in the tent. The Great Jon, Roose Bolton, Edmure Tully, and a few northern lords. All eyed Jon with varying degrees of curiosity. "Show me the letter." Jon handed it over, heart pounding. Robb read it, his brow furrowing, then passed it to the Great Jon, who gave a rumbling laugh. "Legitimized? By the damned king." Edmure Tully's face was solemn. "If it is true, it might allow a new claimant to appear. The last thing we need is more confusion over claims." Roose Bolton's pale eyes flicked to Jon. "It could sow chaos among our foes. Or among us. Is that Baelish's intention?" Robb exhaled, his gaze on Jon. "What do you make of this, brother?" Jon shifted uneasily. The flicker of the torchlight played on the men's faces, turning them into grim specters. "I'm not sure. Part of me thinks it's a trap. But if this decree exists, it might help us discredit Joffrey or rally some of Robert's old bannermen. Perhaps it could free Sansa." He paused, swallowing. "I don't want to be king, Robb. I have no wish to supplant you. But if this can help us defeat the Lannisters..." Robb studied his brother. He saw the honesty there, the conflict. Slowly he nodded. "We have bigger problems than who is king. If we can use this to our advantage, we should. We must confirm its authenticity. The question is how." Jon offered a suggestion. "We could try to arrange a meeting with Baelish, but that's dangerous. He'll be in King's Landing or the Vale. We cannot trust him." Bolton's voice slithered into the conversation. "There is also Lord Tywin to consider. He might pay handsomely for such a document, or crush it entirely. Perhaps we should see if we can glean more information from our sources in King's Landing. The spider, Varys, might know something." Edmure nodded. "Tyrion Lannister is Hand of the King in all but name. We have his brother Jaime captive at Riverrun. There may be an exchange to be made." Jon's head spun. He had come all this way only to hear more questions than answers. But as they spoke, one thing became clear. The decree, if genuine, could be a powerful bargaining chip. It could delegitimize Joffrey, strengthen the Stark cause, or at least open new alliances. On the other hand, it might divide the North if certain lords decided to follow Jon Stark instead of King Robb. The entire matter was a sword without a hilt, dangerous to wield. Robb silenced the table with a raised hand. "Enough. We cannot decide on this tonight. I want to move the army closer to Harrenhal, see if we can outmaneuver Tywin or force him to the negotiation table." If Baelish truly wishes to speak, he'll have to come to us, or we'll send an envoy. He turned to Jon. In the meantime, you stay with us. If the decree is real, you'll need my protection, or you may find a knife in your back. The last thing the Lannisters want is another recognized claimant who can challenge Joffrey. Jon nodded. The great Jon gave a booming laugh, slapping Jon's back. Well, Stark, if that's who you are, you'll drink with us tonight, eh? King's business is bloody business. Despite himself, Jon mustered a wan smile. The men around him, formidable though they were, had become his companions in war. Their acceptance and wariness mingled in equal measure. He wondered how different all of this might have been if Ned Stark still lived. Perhaps, in some other world, Ned would have told him the truth. Or perhaps Robert Baratheon never would have died so soon. Too many maybes haunted Jon's mind. So it was that Jon remained with Robb's host as they moved south and east, forging alliances with disaffected riverlords and waging a guerrilla war against Tywin's foraging parties. Letters flew back and forth, with Baelish dropping hints that he would share the original decree. For a price. Robb hesitated, suspecting a trick, but as the war dragged on, and as word spread that Stannis had marched on King's Landing only to be repelled by Wildfire and Lannister reinforcements, it seemed the Lannisters might be growing too powerful. Then came news that changed everything. The destruction of much of Stannis's fleet at the Battle of the Blackwater, the solidification of Joffrey's regime, and the alliance cemented with House Tyrell. In the north, there were whispers that Balon Greyjoy had crowned himself king of the Isles and the North, raiding the northern coasts. Robb faced war on all sides, and his recent marriage to a Westerling girl caused friction with the Freys. The walls were closing in. In desperation, Robb agreed to at least hear out Baelish's offer. A secret meeting was arranged in an abandoned village near the Riverlands, with each side to bring only a few guards. Jon insisted on being present. The great Jon was suspicious but complied. Roose Bolton offered to oversee security with his men, though Jon felt uneasy about the man's cold eyes. On the appointed day, under gray skies and a cold wind, Robb, Jon, and a handful of trusted guards arrived at the ruin of an old September stones lay tumbled about. The roof partially collapsed. Crows perched on the broken walls. Jon clutched the hilt of his sword, scanning for potential traps. Ghost prowled in the shadows, red eyes keen. Baelish arrived late, wearing fine yet subdued clothing, with only a few men in tow. He smiled that thin-lipped smile and gave an exaggerated bow to Robb. "Your Grace, how wonderful to see you," he murmured. Robb scowled. "Let's speak plainly, Baelish. You claim to have a decree from King Robert that legitimizes my brother Jon. Show it to us or we leave." Littlefinger made a clicking sound with his tongue. "So quick to business. I admire that, truly." He reached into his doublet and withdrew a folded parchment, sealed with wax that bore the stag sigil. "I believe this is what you want." Jon's eyes locked on it. His pulse pounded. Robb's men tensed, expecting a betrayal at any moment. Baelish extended the parchment. Robb took it, broke the seal, and read silently. For a long time he said nothing. Then he handed it to Jon, who stared at the words, heart hammering. The text was incomplete but unmistakable. "By the grace of the gods, I, Robert Baratheon, first of my name, do hereby legitimize Jon Snow, bastard of Eddard Stark, as Jon Stark, granting him all rights, recognized scion of both House Stark and House Baratheon. Should any question of lineage arise, he stands as..." The script trailed off near the end, as though Robert had not finished dictating. But the royal seal was clear. It was real. Jon felt dizzy. It was not some forgery or half-truth. It was Robert's signature. He recognized Ned's name, recognized the shaky scrawl that might well have been done on the king's deathbed. This scrap of parchment meant he was, by royal decree, no longer a bastard. It spoke of a claim that might even challenge Joffrey. Robb gave Jon a searching look. "You see," he said softly. Before Jon could reply, Baelish cleared his throat. "Of course, you may wonder why I've brought this to you rather than the Lannisters or Lord Tywin or, well, the highest bidder. The answer is simple. I believe in strategic alliances, and I have a fondness for your late father, Ned." I would rather see the realm stable under a Stark hand than cowering under Lannisters, if that can be arranged. Now, in exchange for this priceless item, I require certain concessions. Robb's voice hardened. Name them. Baelish smiled. I would ask that, once you've used this decree to press your advantage or strike a deal with the Iron Throne, you name me Lord of Harrenhal, with all attendant lands and incomes, fully recognized by the king in the north or by whomever sits the Iron Throne if you intend to unify the realm. Additionally, I would like the Vale to remain neutral or allied with the Starks in future conflicts, which I might be able to arrange through Lady Lisa Arryn. She does trust me, after all. Robb's stare was icy. You want Harrenhal? That cursed ruin. Baelish spread his hands. A ruin, perhaps, but a ruin with significant incomes and lands attached. A trifling request for the future of the kingdom, if I do say so myself. Tension pulsed in the air. Jon wanted to fling the parchment back at Baelish and declare that they would not be blackmailed, but he forced himself to consider the bigger picture. This was not only about him. This was about the war, about the people suffering. If legitimizing Jon gave them a path to potentially end the war, maybe by proving Joffrey was not Robert's heir, could that save lives? Robb exhaled slowly. I can't promise to unify the realm under one king. The North remembers, and the North has declared independence. But we also want justice for my father. Perhaps we can use this decree to force the Lannisters to the negotiation table, or to sway some of King Robert's old allies. He paused. Harrenhal is not mine to give. It belongs to the Iron Throne or whomever is recognized. But if we do find ourselves forging a peace, I will name you Lord of Harrenhal in the North's eyes. Baelish's smile curved, satisfied enough by that vague guarantee. Agreed, Your Grace. I shall leave the decree in your keeping. Consider it a token of my devotion. May it serve you well. He handed over the parchment fully, then gave a mocking bow. Now, if that is all? Robb's eyes narrowed. We could kill you right now, take it, and rid ourselves of a dangerous schemer. Baelish laughed quietly, unperturbed. You could try, but that would bring no end of complications, and I rather think you'd have 1,000 men on your heels once word spread. I have powerful friends, and you are in the midst of a war. Best for us both if I walk away, no? Robb said nothing. Baelish bowed again, turned on his heel, and departed with his guards, leaving the Starks and their men behind. Silence hung in the ruined September. The great Jon spat. I don't like that one. Too slippery by half. Roose Bolton gave a half-smile. But we have what we need. His pale eyes flicked to Jon. A new Stark, recognized by the crown. Jon stood, the decree in his hands, heart pounding. He stared at Robb, who watched him with a mixture of caution and warmth. Well, brother, Robb murmured. It seems you truly are my father's son in the eyes of the realm. Jon didn't know what to say. He felt a swirl of emotion. Pride, confusion, dread. What now? Robb ran a hand through his auburn hair. Now we decide how to use this, or whether we use it at all. He signaled the men to return to camp. One thing is certain. If the Lannisters learn of this, they'll move swiftly to destroy you, Jon. They won't want a newly legitimized Stark with Baratheon ties complicating Joffrey's reign. We must be cautious. Together, they rode away from the ruined sept, heading back to the war camp under the lowering clouds. In Jon's pouch was the old parchment that changed everything, that threatened to reshape the balance of power in the realm. He wondered if it might also unravel the fragile unity of the North. After all, how many proud Northern lords would question if Robb should remain king in the North when Ned Stark's newly legitimized son might have some tie to the Iron Throne? That night, in the lamplit council tent, the Northern lords gathered. The great Jon, Bolton, Lady Mormont, Edmure Tully, and others. The decree lay on the table like a coiled serpent. Jon sat at one side, Robb at the head, exchanging uneasy glances. Edmure broke the silence. If we reveal this decree, the realm will see that Joffrey is not Robert's rightful heir, and that Robert himself favored a Stark. Bolton steepled his fingers. Precisely. That alone might cause some of the Crownlands or Stormlands to rise against the Lannisters, potentially siding with us, or with Stannis or Renly's memory. But Renly is dead now, so his bannermen might flock to Stannis or remain loyal to the Tyrell-Lannister alliance. They might also shift allegiance to any recognized Baratheon heir. But the decree is unclear about making Jon the actual heir to the Iron Throne. It only speaks of legitimizing him and forging a tie between Stark and Baratheon. Robb nodded. It's incomplete. Robert died before he could finish. It mentions Jon as a recognized scion, but does that truly give him a claim to the throne? Jon swallowed, heat creeping up his neck. I don't want the throne. I'm sworn to House Stark, to you, Robb. Even if this decree says I'm some recognized tie to Robert's line, that changes nothing in my heart. Robb gave Jon a grateful look. I know that, but the politics might be different. Our enemies might see you as a threat, or some of our allies might prefer you as a figurehead if they think the North can't stand alone. The war is bigger than our personal wishes. Lyanna Mormont, a fierce young girl who spoke with surprising authority, declared, The North declared you king in the North, Robb Stark. We are loyal to you. If your brother is truly a Stark now, that's all well and good, but it does not change our loyalties. Others around the table murmured agreement. They were proud Northmen, not easily swayed by the idea of southern crowns. Edmure Tully considered carefully. But if we are to rescue Sansa and secure peace, we need leverage. This decree is leverage. We could threaten to present Jon as Robert's chosen if they do not negotiate. Then perhaps we can exchange Jaime for Sansa, and the realm might see reason. Roose Bolton's voice was silky. We might also turn it to our advantage in alliances. Stannis claims the throne, but has no love from the Southern Lords. He might welcome the chance to ally with a recognized Baratheon scion if it means toppling Joffrey. But that would place us in Stannis' camp, potentially forcing us to bend the knee to him afterward. Robb frowned. I will not bend the knee. My father died for honor and justice. The North has sacrificed too much. We declared independence. I refused to yield that, unless we had no other choice. The debate raged for hours. Jon listened, silent and uneasy, as the lords weighed the potential uses of the decree. Some advocated for immediate revelation, forging alliances across the realm. Others insisted on secrecy, using the threat of the decree to force a peace that recognized northern independence. A few, like Bolton, hinted that they might prefer an alliance with the Iron Throne if it ended the war swiftly. At last, Robb slammed his palm on the table. Enough! We will keep this secret for now. I'll write to certain lords in the Stormlands, see if any remain loyal to the Baratheon name. Perhaps they'll rally to a recognized tie of Robert's, but will not announce it publicly yet. We do so only if it helps us secure Sansa's freedom or an advantageous treaty. Is that understood? They all voiced their agreement or reluctant acceptance. Jon felt a strange mix of relief and tension. The decree was real, but it would remain a hidden card in their hand, a secret that might one day shape the fate of Westeros. Days turned to weeks as the armies maneuvered. Jon fought alongside Robb in skirmishes against Lannister outriders, growing adept at commanding small units. Whispers circulated among the men about the real reason Baelish had visited, but few knew the truth. Jon only confided in Robb and a handful of the High Lords. At night, he lay awake in his tent, sometimes staring at the parchment in his hands, reading the shaky scrawl of Robert Baratheon's signature. Part of him felt unworthy of the name Stark, let alone any connection to a throne. Another part of him felt a fierce, unexpected pride that he was, in the eyes of the law, truly Eddard Stark's son. Yet a darkness crept over the war. Robb received word that Winterfell had been partly burned in the aftermath of Theon's takeover, that Bran and Rickon were missing, and that the Bolton forces were retaking territory in the north. The Freys fumed over Robb's marriage to Jane Westerling and the alliance with the Riverlands frayed. Tywin Lannister hammered away at the realm's defenders, and the Tyrells showered kings landing with grain and gold, securing popular support for Joffrey. Desperate, Robb arranged a meeting with Walder Frey to mend the rift. The northern host traveled to the Twins, where a wedding feast was to be held for Edmure Tully and one of Frey's daughters, in exchange for safe passage. Jon felt a knot of apprehension in his gut as they approached. He did not trust Walder Frey. The old man's watery eyes and lecherous grin struck him as untrustworthy, and his brood of children and grandchildren were an unpredictable lot. Ghost bristled whenever Frey men came near. Nevertheless, they entered the castle. The great hall was set for a large wedding feast. Music played, though it sounded off-key. Robb was uneasy but tried to maintain good manners. Jon took a seat at a side table, close enough to watch the dais but removed from the highborn lords. A few of Frey's men cast curious looks his way, and he wondered if they had heard rumors of the bastard turned Stark. Cups were filled with wine. Edmure was presented with his bride, Roslyn Frey, who seemed sweet and innocent. The ceremony began. Jon tried to focus on the hall, scanning for any sign of danger. The tension in the air was palpable, but the chatter and laughter of some northern lords drowned out caution. Then the bedding was announced, and in a swirl of crude merriment, Edmure was carried off. Suddenly, the music changed. A screech of vials. Doors slammed shut. Crossbowmen appeared along the gallery. Jon felt a jolt of terror as Walder Frey rose to his feet with a cruel grin. "The king in the north arises," he mocked. Chaos. Crossbow bolts rained down on the unsuspecting northern guests. Men leapt up, reaching for swords. Robb was at the dais, struck by multiple bolts. Catelyn screamed. Roose Bolton stepped forward, voice calm as a winter night, and drove a dagger into Robb's heart, whispering, "The Lannisters send their regards." Jon watched in horror as the scene unfolded like a nightmare. He ducked behind a table, wrestling with the shock. Screams echoed. Blood soaked the rushes. Ghost snarled, leaping at a Frey crossbowman, but a quarrel took the direwolf in the side. Jon roared, surging forward to protect his wolf. Another bolt sliced past his ear. He slammed into a Frey man, driving his sword through the man's stomach, then dove for Ghost. The wolf whined, blood matting his fur. Chaos churned all around. Northern men died by the dozens, trapped in a vicious slaughter. Walder Frey cackled, orchestrating the massacre. Jon glimpsed Catelyn, hysterical, holding a knife to the throat of a Frey girl, but Walder sneered. Another moment, and a blade slashed Catelyn's throat. She crumpled. Robb lay lifeless on the floor, eyes staring blankly at nothing. Jon's world collapsed. His brother, his king, was dead. His lady mother, who had never loved him, but still a Stark, was murdered. The Red Wedding, they would call it. The Night House Stark was torn apart. A crossbow quarrel struck Jon in the shoulder, knocking him to his knees. He gasped, pain blinding him. Another Frey man raised a sword, preparing to finish him off. Ghost lunged, despite his own wounds, and tore the man's throat out. Blood sprayed. Jon tried to rise, but his vision blurred. He heard shouting, felt rough hands dragging him. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Walder Frey's smug face and Roose Bolton's unreadable stare. When Jon awoke, he was in chains. His shoulder throbbed, and dried blood caked his tunic. He felt hollow, numb, remembering the horror. Robb was dead. Catelyn was dead. Most of the northern host slaughtered. The air was thick with the stench of blood and decay. He lay on a cold stone floor in what looked like a dim storeroom. Ghost was nowhere to be seen. A door creaked open. Roose Bolton entered, flanked by two of his men. Bolton's pale eyes regarded Jon coolly, as one might regard a piece of meat. "Jon Stark," Bolton said, voice dripping with irony. "Or should I say snow? One might argue the late decree is meaningless now." Jon glared at him. Rage and sorrow warred inside him. He tried to surge to his feet, but the chains bound him short. His wound screamed with pain. "You murdered Robb," he spat. "He was your king." Bolton shrugged. "He made poor choices. Walder Frey and Tywin Lannister offered me a better deal. Now the North belongs to me as warden in service to King Joffrey, or King Tommen if that comes to pass. The details matter little." Jon's breath came in ragged heaves. The agony in his shoulder was excruciating, but he forced himself to speak. "You are no Northman. You are a traitor." Bolton's lips twisted. "Harsh words from a bastard. My bastard will love to have some sport with you, no doubt. But perhaps we can make better use of you. I hear there's a certain decree naming you a legitimate Stark, recognized by Robert Baratheon. We wouldn't want that to fall into the wrong hands, would we?" Jon's heart lurched. Where was the parchment? Had it been taken in the chaos? "You'll never," he began, but Bolton cut him off with a languid wave. "Oh, I already have it," Bolton said softly. "I took it from Robb's corpse. Such a curious document. If House Lannister or King Joffrey sees it, they might consider you a threat. But it could also be useful if I wish to manipulate the North. Some of the Northern lords might still rally around a Stark name if we wave you in front of them like a puppet." Jon felt cold dread. Bolton intended to use him, to parade him as a puppet Stark to keep the North in line. Or kill him if he proved uncooperative. "I will never serve you," Jon hissed. Bolton only offered a thin smile. "I thought as much, so perhaps I'll send you to my bastard at the Dreadfort. He's quite inventive with disobedient captives. But there's no rush. The Freys are squealing over who gets what. Tywin is still in King's Landing, pulling the strings. We have all the time we need to convince you." He turned to go. "In the meantime, rest. You'll need your strength." The door slammed shut, plunging Jon into darkness. He shuddered, leaning his head against the cold stone wall. The ache in his shoulder was matched only by the ache in his heart. Robb gone. His mother gone. The North betrayed. And that damned parchment, Robert's final decree, now in the hands of the worst possible man. Jon closed his eyes, tears burning. He thought of Ned's quiet honor, of Robb's fierce loyalty, of the family he had lost. He wondered if Ghost was still alive somewhere, or if the direwolf had fallen in the slaughter. He had never felt so hopeless, yet a spark of stubborn defiance still burned in his chest. He was a Stark by gods, by a king's decree, by birth, by blood. No matter what Bolton did, Jon vowed he would never let them break him. Days bled into nights. The storeroom that served as Jon's cell had a single high window, offering only a sliver of light. His wound festered. Food was scarce. Occasionally, Frey men came to taunt him, or Bolton's men arrived to ask if he was ready to pledge fealty. He refused them each time, earning beatings and mockery. He dreaded the moment he might be sent to the Dreadfort to meet Ramsay Snow, the bastard of Bolton with a reputation for sadism. The thought curdled Jon's stomach. Would they flay him alive, as House Bolton was rumored to do to enemies? Yet he endured, clinging to any shred of hope. Then, one night, there was a shuffle outside his cell. The door creaked open, and two figures in cloaks slipped inside, carrying lanterns. Jon tensed, expecting new tormentors. But then he saw who they were. One was Grey Wind. No, that was impossible. It was another direwolf, a great gray beast. No, wait, it wasn't a wolf at all. Jon's vision blurred. The second cloaked figure stepped forward and knelt, brandishing a key. A hissed whisper, "Jon, quiet. We're here to help you." Blinking, Jon realized the direwolf was actually a large hound with a dark coat. But the figure next to it pulled back a hood, revealing the face of a young woman with short dark hair, half of it messy and ragged. She looked at him with fierce gray eyes. "Arya," Jon breathed, heart almost stopping in shock. Couldn't be. She put a finger to her lips. "Shoo, we've not much time." Indeed, it was Arya Stark, changed by hardships, thin and wild-eyed but unmistakably Arya. She fiddled with the lock on Jon's shackles. Another figure loomed behind her, a tall man wearing a hound's helm. Sandor Clegane, the hound, face partially burned, scowling. "How?" Jon managed, mind spinning. Arya grimaced. "Long story. The hound took me from King's Landing after things. I escaped him, then ended up crossing paths again, ironically. We heard the rumors of the Red Wedding, so we came here." Her voice broke for a moment. "I saw them kill Robb. They set Grey Wind's head on Father's body. Or was it the other way around?" A shudder. "It was horrible." Jon clenched his fists. "Gods, I'm so sorry, Arya. She shook her head, forcing herself not to dwell. We found out you were alive, a captive from some drunken phrase, so we came to get you out. The chain unlocked with a click, and Jon felt the iron fall from his wrists. The hound stepped forward, helping Jon stand. Jon flinched, but the man just grunted. Don't get any fancy ideas, Sandor muttered. I'm not here for love of Starks, but your sister's paying me good coin to help you escape. Jon blinked at Arya. You had coin? Arya gave a ghost of a grin. I got a little from someone. Let's not talk about it now. We need to go. Jon's battered body protested every movement. His shoulder throbbed and he stumbled, but Arya and the hound helped him hobble out of the cell. Ghost was nowhere to be seen, and Jon's heart twisted at that. But he forced himself onward. They snuck through dark corridors, stepping over passed-out Frey guards. The fortress was half empty. Most men had marched away or were too drunk to care. They made their way to the courtyard, found horses. The hound hoisted Jon into a saddle. Arya climbed onto another horse with practiced ease, her face set in grim determination. The hound mounted as well. They spurred the horses, galloping into the night before an alarm could be raised. Jon grimaced against the pain. They rode hard, first across the drawbridge, then into the cold darkness beyond. Dogs barked behind them, voices shouted, but they did not stop. Through the gloom, they pressed on. Eventually, dawn broke, revealing the bleak riverlands spread before them. They halted near a copse of trees to catch their breath. Jon, trembling and pale from blood loss, nearly fell from the saddle. Arya rushed to support him. Sandor rummaged for bandages. Jon stared at his sister. "Thank you," he breathed. He felt tears sting his eyes at seeing her alive, remembering how small she was when he left for the wall, or had it been so long. She looked older, harder, as if she had lived 10 lifetimes. Arya gave a shaky smile. "We Starks have to stick together." Then her face fell. "But Robb and Mother." Jon closed his eyes, tears escaping. "They're gone." A heavy silence enveloped them. Even Sandor looked away, as though embarrassed by the display of emotion. After a moment, Jon forced himself to focus on the future. "We need to keep moving." Bolton took Robert's decree from Robb's body. "If we can get it back." Arya frowned. "What decree?" Quietly, Jon explained what had happened. Robert Baratheon's final command, legitimizing Jon as a Stark and forging a link to the Baratheon claim. Arya listened with wide eyes, disbelief flickering across her features. When he finished, she shook her head. I had no idea. Father never said anything about that." Jon sighed. "He probably never had the chance. But if Bolton has it, he might use it to manipulate the North or curry favor with the Lannisters." Arya spat on the ground. "Then we'll kill him and take it back." The hound snorted. "Kill Roose Bolton in the heart of the North? Why not challenge Tywin Lannister to a duel while we're at it?" He cast a calculating look at Arya. "If we want to survive, we'd best get as far away from those traitors as we can. North or east or wherever." Jon closed his eyes, feeling torn. He wanted to go north, retake Winterfell somehow, avenge his family. But the war had collapsed in a red flood of betrayal. What allies remained? The Great Jon was presumably dead or captured. The Tullys were in disarray. The Lannisters held King's Landing, and Tywin had likely rewarded Bolton and Walder Frey with dominion over the north. In the hush, Arya said softly, "The Wall. We can go to the Wall. That's where you always said you'd go." Jon grimaced. "The Night's Watch still stands, but I'm no longer just a bastard boy with no claim. If the decree is true, I have a duty. But I have no men, no resources. The Wall might at least offer shelter. My uncle Benjen was a ranger there before." He trailed off, remembering how Benjen had vanished beyond the Wall. Sandor muttered a curse. "The Wall is 1,000 leagues from here, more maybe, but we can ride that way if you've coin to feed the horses. I'm no servant, boy." He glowered at Jon. Arya bristled. "He's not a boy. He's my brother, the rightful Lord Stark." Show some respect, or I'll stick you with the pointy end." The hound rolled his eyes. "Seven hells, you're both battered pups." Jon mustered a weary breath. "We'll head north for now, keep off the main roads, avoid Fry patrols. There must still be pockets of loyal northerners. We might find refuge. Then we'll see." He looked at Arya, the only family he had left by his side. "We survive first," he said quietly. "Then we plan our vengeance." Arya nodded, tears glistening in her eyes, but a steely resolve on her face. For Robb, for Mother, for Father. Jon leaned on her, pain radiating from his shoulder. He closed his eyes briefly, imagining Ned's face. He was not sure if any gods listened, but he prayed silently to the old gods for strength to keep going. As dawn lightened the sky, they guided their horses north, away from the horror they left behind. Jon did not know what awaited them in the war-ravaged land. The world had become an endless battlefield, with cunning traitors and ruthless kings. He was a newly legitimized Stark with a claim that might unite the Baratheon and Stark lines, but that piece of parchment was in the hands of the monstrous Boltons. Everything seemed lost, yet he held on to the faint hope that, with Arya by his side, with the North in his blood, perhaps he could carve a path forward. So they rode, three unlikely companions, the wounded Stark, the vengeful Stark girl, and the hound with his burned face, trailing through the muddy roads, forging a precarious alliance of necessity. Wolves had to stick together in a land full of lions and treacherous men. Though the Red Wedding had crushed Robb's rebellion, the seeds of rebellion still flickered in the hearts of Northerners who hated the Freys and the Boltons. Whispers traveled faster than armies. Some said that a son of Ned Stark lived, legitimized by the dead king himself, carrying the spirit of the North's rightful vengeance. Perhaps the rumor was only half believed. Perhaps it would die in the mud. But as winter crept closer, and the nights grew long, men whispered, "The Starks are not done yet." In distant King's Landing, Tywin Lannister smiled in triumph. He had secured the North througroose Roose Bolton, crushed the Stark threat, wed Joffrey to Margaery Tyrell, and planned for a new age of Lannister supremacy. But in his chambers, among a flurry of reports, he read a curious line. "Arya Stark rumored to be alive, bastard of Stark escaped, legitimized by Robert's decree." Tywin's frown deepened. He would have to deal with that eventually. In the end, the story was far from over. Jon Stark was out there, battered but unbowed, carrying the memory of his family and the weight of a dead king's last wish. The winds of winter whistled across the land, and the future remained uncertain as ever. Yet in that uncertainty, a spark of the North's old strength lived on, embodied by a young man who, for the first time in his life, had the name he was born to bear, and the burdens that came with it. He was a Stark now, truly and fully, and no betrayal could strip him of that truth. So long as breath filled his lungs and wolf's blood raced in his veins, he would stand, even against the gathering dark. And the dark was indeed gathering, both in the hearts of men and in the far northern reaches beyond the wall, where other threats stirred, threats that cared little for crowns or parchments, but might one day force them all to unite under a single banner if they hoped to survive the coming cold. Jon Stark, though he could scarcely bring himself to claim that name, leaned against the trunk of a wind-scraped tree, cold sweat beading on his brow. His shoulder burned fiercely where a crossbow bolt had torn the flesh during the Red Wedding massacre. With trembling fingers, he tried to adjust the crude bandage that Arya and the Hound had managed to wrap around him. The pain made him lightheaded, and the shock of his narrow escape still quivered through his body. Dawn light spilled across the desolate landscape, revealing nothing but a ribbon of dirt road winding through hills mottled by gnarled trees. A distant crow cawed. For a moment, Jon half imagined he stood in the Wolfswood outside Winterfell, that he might glimpse the squat towers of his childhood home if he climbed the next ridge. But the memory of blood and betrayal rushed back in, and the illusions of safer times dissolved. They were in the Riverlands, or what was left of them, where war and famine had ravaged every village in sight. Arya Stark crouched near him, watching warily as the Hound rifled through his saddlebag. She had changed so much since their last meeting in Winterfell, when she was just a small girl with a wooden practice sword. Now her hair was raggedly shorn, her face smudged with dirt, and her gray eyes burned with a fierce intelligence and anger that belied her youth. "How do you feel?" she asked softly, running a hand over his brow. "Like I've been kicked by a mule," Jon managed, though his lips twisted into a wry half-smile. "But I'll live." Arya nodded, pressing her lips together. She said nothing more, but her expression spoke volumes. She had seen death at the twins, had watched Catelyn and Robb fall, and that horror still played in her eyes. Sandor Clegane, the Hound, straightened with a grunt. "We can't linger," he said. "If the Freys or Boltons realize their prized hostage slipped away, they'll be after us soon enough." Jon pulled himself to his feet, swaying slightly as the pain in his shoulder throbbed. "We'll have to find a place to rest eventually," he said. "I can't ride far like this." The Hound eyed him sourly. "If you slow me down so much we get caught, I'll leave you behind. Girl or no girl." Arya's eyes flashed. "You'll do no such thing," she snapped, hand drifting toward the small sword at her hip, needle which she guarded with her life. "All right, you'll kill me in my sleep," the Hound growled back, sarcasm in his tone. "But I'm telling you, these lands are crawling with Frey patrols. If they find us, they'll know exactly who you two are. I doubt they'll be gentle." Jon took a deep breath, forcing himself to ignore the throbbing in his shoulder. "Let's move, then." They mounted their horses. Two scrawny Mares and a broad-chested gelding the Hound had claimed for himself. Jon grit his teeth as he climbed into the saddle, feeling a wave of nausea. Arya pressed her lips in concern, but said nothing, only guiding her horse closer as if to catch him if he slipped. The trio set off, heading north by the rising sun, keeping to back roads and forest trails whenever they could. Jon tried to stay alert, scanning the terrain for any sign of pursuers, but every jolt of his horse shot fresh pain through his wound. More than once, his vision blurred, the edges going black. Somehow he stayed upright, unwilling to let Arya see him weaken further. Eventually, they paused in a stand of pines near a muddy creek. The day had grown warm, but a stiff breeze carried the tang of coming rain. Arya gathered kindling to start a small fire. The Hound tethered the horses, then peered at Jon with reluctant concern. "Let me see that wound," he barked. Jon gingerly peeled off his cloak, then his blood-crusted tunic, bearing the bandage. Arya sucked in a breath at the sight of dark, dried blood matting his flesh. The Hound scowled. "That's festering. We need clean water and a proper dressing." Arya rummaged through her pack and produced a small stoppered bottle. "I found this in an abandoned September. A maester's kit, I think." She pulled the stopper and gave it a sniff, wrinkling her nose. "Smells like vinegar." Jon glanced at the liquid. Better than nothing. They boiled water over a small flame, and Arya carefully cleaned the wound while Jon gritted his teeth. She poured a little of the vinegar mixture onto the rag, pressing it to the torn flesh. White-hot agony burned through him, but he made no sound, only clenched his jaw until his teeth might crack. The Hound stood guard, arms folded, scanning the woods. When Arya finished, she bandaged him with strips of linen. "That'll have to do," she whispered. Jon gave her a grateful nod, though sweat beaded on his face. His mind drifted to the decree Robert Baratheon had signed, now lost to Roose Bolton. He felt a bitter pang. Even if he possessed it, what difference would it make after the Red Wedding? Robb was dead, the northern host shattered. Was there still hope for House Stark or the North? Arya seemed to sense his thoughts. "When we reach the North, we'll find another way," she said, voice low but firm. "Father always said the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Bolton and Frey deserve to die for what they did." Jon rubbed his tired eyes. "Aye, but it won't be easy. They have the might of the Lannisters behind them now, and the North is in chaos. They'll be expecting us. Even if we found some loyal clans, what good would a few hundred swords do against the armies they control?" Arya gave him a fierce look. "We have to try." Jon could only nod. He did not want to quash her determination, In some ways, it was the only thing keeping her going. Yet he knew the road ahead was dark. The hound cleared his throat. "If you two are done with your sweet northern revenge talk, we should move before the real soldiers come sniffing. The longer we linger, the worse your odds." They doused the fire and rode on, forging a path through half-ruined villages and fields overgrown with weeds. Smoke sometimes drifted from distant farmhouses, but they kept away. Trust was scarce in these times, with outlaws and broken men roaming everywhere. The war had turned once loyal peasants into thieves or mercenaries. Night fell, and the trio found a dry hollow beneath a cluster of ancient oaks. The hound made a crude camp, propping up a piece of canvas to shield them from the coming rain. Arya coaxed a tiny fire from damp twigs, and the flickering light danced across their weary faces. Thunder rolled in the distance. Jon huddled in his cloak, his shoulder aching, staring at the flames. He thought of Ghost. Some nights he dreamt of an albino wolf, pacing restlessly in the darkness. Had Ghost survived the massacre at the Twins? Jon remembered seeing his beloved direwolf right before Roose Bolton's men pinned Jon down, but it was all a haze after that. The possibility that Ghost might be lost or dead wrenched at him. The direwolf had been a constant companion, never judging him for being a bastard, always loyal. Jon's heart felt heavier than ever. Arya reached over and placed a small hand on his wrist. "We'll find him," she said, as if reading his thoughts. "He's strong. He'll find his way back to you." Jon wanted to believe it. He managed a faint smile. "I hope so," he whispered. They huddled closer to the fire, and Arya told him in hushed tones how she had fled King's Landing after Ned Stark's execution, disguised as a boy, captured by Lannisters, escaped Harrenhal, and wandered the war-ravaged countryside. How she had crossed paths with the Brotherhood without banners, and how the Hound had snatched her away, aiming to ransom her to her brother or mother. Jon listened, his heart breaking at all she had endured. He wanted to hug her, to promise her safety, but he had nothing to offer but the comfort of his presence. The Hound sat a short distance away, chewing on a strip of salted beef. Now and again, he cast glances at them, perhaps uneasy at hearing the depth of Arya's hardships. If he felt any guilt, Jon could not be sure, but his face was thoughtful in the dim firelight. At length, exhaustion overwhelmed them. They set a watch rotation, with the Hound taking first watch, Arya the second, and Jon the third. Night passed in a blur of nightmares and half-waking terror of discovery. Rain pattered softly on the canvas. Come dawn, they broke camp and continued their slow exodus north. Over the next week, they fell into a routine. Jon's wound gradually improved, though it remained painful. The threat of pursuit seemed to lessen as they put distance between themselves and the Frey stronghold. But each day they had to scrounge for food, risk exposure, and remain vigilant for bandits. At times, they crossed near lifeless fields where crows cawed over shallow graves. The stench of rot clung to the summer air. They saw villages burned to ash, the bones of livestock picked clean by scavengers. War had taken a terrible toll, and winter was on the horizon. Everywhere lay signs that the small folk despaired of any king or cause. Occasionally, they encountered stray pockets of men who recognized the Hound or glimpsed Arya's stark features. Once, a handful of outlaws, wearing no sigil, each a ragged wretch, tried to rob them. The conflict was brief and bloody. Sandor Clegane cut down two with savage efficiency, while Arya, quick as a viper, thrust needle through a third man's throat. Jon, moving more slowly thanks to his shoulder, only managed to block a clumsy strike before the fight was done. The remaining outlaws fled into the woods. Afterward, Arya stood over the body of the man she had killed, face pale. Jon placed a hand on her shoulder, unsure what to say. She met his gaze, eyes haunted, then turned away. "He was going to kill us?" she murmured, as though seeking reassurance. Jon nodded. "You did what you had to." They pressed on. Sometimes, the Hound spoke of heading west instead, claiming there were fewer soldiers that way, but Jon insisted they keep the general northerly direction. He had no illusions of retaking Winterfell by himself, but he felt the pull of home. Arya echoed it, reluctant to stray too far from the land of their birth. On a grim morning when low clouds threatened rain, they came across a small roadside inn. The roof looked intact, smoke trailed from the chimney, and a creaking sign swung above the door. The place seemed almost inviting in a realm otherwise ravaged by war. Yet caution prickled through Jon. "We need fresh supplies," the hound muttered, dismounting. "Or do you plan on starving?" Jon dismounted too, wincing as he landed. "We'll be careful," he said, eyeing the inn warily. Arya moved beside him, glancing around. "Wait," she whispered. "I see people." Indeed, shadows flickered behind the grimy windows. With no better option for food or rest, they tethered their horses out back. The hound banged on the rear door, sword in hand. After a tense moment, a terrified innkeep peered out, a middle-aged woman with hollow cheeks. She took in the sight of the three armed travelers and shrank back. "Food and ale," the hound demanded. "We can pay." Jon gave a nod, trying to seem less threatening. "We mean no harm." The woman cast a nervous glance over their leathers and cloaks. "Come in," she croaked, "but keep your steel sheathed. Too much blood in these parts already." They followed her inside. The inn's common room was dimly lit by small windows and a few candles. A handful of haggard patrons sat at rough wooden tables, nursing cups of ale or bowls of thin stew. Their eyes flicked up, full of suspicion. In one corner, a bearded man tuned a lute half-heartedly. Arya took in every detail, hand near needle's hilt. The hound found a table against the far wall, and Jon settled beside him, gingerly lowering himself into the chair. The innkeep bustled over, setting down a clay jug of water and a crust of bread. "Fresh stew will be ready soon," she said. "Best we can do." Jon glanced around, uneasy. In times like these, alliances shifted swiftly. The wrong word could see them reported to the nearest lord. Roose Bolton's men might be scouring the region, or perhaps the phrase. A surly man in patched leathers glowered from a nearby table. "You folks from the south or the north?" he asked, voice rough. The hound gave a dismissive snort. "We're from nowhere, just passing through." Arya took a sip of water, ignoring the stranger. Jon forced a polite nod, though he kept his gaze down. The innkeep returned with 3 bowls of thin stew, more watery turnips than anything else, and a small loaf of bread. "That's a silver stag," she announced, eyes darting anxiously between them. Jon dug into his belt pouch and found a battered silver coin. The hound tossed it on the table. "There, and a bit extra if you'll give us feed for the horses." She nodded rapidly. "Yes, of course." Then she scurried away. The stew was bland, but after days of half-rotten apples and stale bread, it felt like a feast. They ate quickly, mindful not to draw attention. Yet the tension in the room only seemed to thicken. The surly man kept watching them. Another fellow, younger and dressed in the tatters of some minor house's livery, leaned over and whispered something to his companion. Arya's grip on her spoon tightened. "They're looking at us," she murmured to Jon under her breath. "Should we leave?" "Let's finish eating first," Jon said softly. "We might be imagining the worst." As if on cue, the older man with the lute stood, walked a few paces closer to their table, and cleared his throat. "Beg pardon, travelers," he said. "Any chance you've news from the twins? Heard talk of a wedding there, a betrayal, blood." His voice cracked. Jon's jaw clenched. The memory flashed. Robb riddled with crossbow bolts, Caitlyn's shriek. "The wedding was a slaughter," he said in a low voice. "Fry treachery." The man swallowed. "Aye, that's what they say." He coughed. "And the king in the north? Is it true he's dead?" Arya stared hard at the tabletop, refusing to speak. The hound gave a curt nod. "He's dead, all right, and that's all the talk we've got." Silence fell across the common room. One of the patrons muttered an oath. Another spat on the floor. Hatred or grief flickered in a few eyes. The man with the lute sighed heavily. "That's ill news. The North is lost now, maybe, if the Boltons and Freys rule in the name of the Lannisters." Jon swallowed a surge of emotion. He had to stifle an urge to stand and proclaim himself a Stark, though that would have been suicidal. Instead, he set down his spoon and forced himself to remain calm. "We live in dark times," he said, voice hollow. The surly man in leathers suddenly pushed away from his table, stomping over. His gaze flicked between them, settling on Jon. "Something about you reminds me of the Starks," he said, tone accusing. Arya's hand slid to needle. The hound tensed. Jon's heart hammered. "You've got the wrong man," he said quietly, though he knew how unconvincing that must sound. The man leaned closer, breath smelling of ale. "Do I?" he growled. "There's a rumor, that Ned Stark had a bastard who's on the loose. Jon Snow. Or maybe he's calling himself something else these days. Some say he was legitimized." A hush fell over the inn. Even the innkeep, cowering near the kitchen door, seemed to hold her breath. Arya stared daggers at the man, but Jon spoke carefully, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm no highborn, friend. You can see my rags." The man sneered. "If you are him, I'd best turn you in to the Freys or the Boltons. Might fetch a handsome reward." The hound rose abruptly, towering over the man by a good foot. "I'd think carefully about that, friend," he snarled, resting a hand on the hilt of his long sword. Tension coiled. The surly man glanced at the hound's massive frame and the burn-scarred face. Recognized him, perhaps. Fear flickered in his eyes, but he had the stubborn look of a man too deep in his cups to back down easily. He took a step backward. "Sandor Clegane," he spat. "You were King Joffrey's dog. Ought to turn you in too." "Do that," the hound said in a low, menacing tone. "You'll be dead before you take 2 steps out that door." A drawn-out moment followed, as if the entire room balanced on a knife point. Then the surly man let out a barking laugh, turning away as though deciding it wasn't worth the risk. "Bloody outlaws," he muttered, stumbling back to his seat. Jon exhaled, every muscle tensed for a fight. The hound sat again, scraping his chair angrily across the floor. Arya's eyes never left the man. "Enough," Jon said softly, touching Arya's arm. "Let's finish up and go." They gulped down the last of their stew and left another silver stag for the innkeep, who watched them depart with a mix of relief and caution. The yard behind the inn was empty, save for their 3 horses. No one attempted to stop them as they mounted. Once they were safely out of sight, Jon turned to Arya. "That was too close. Word is spreading. If men suspect I'm Ned Stark's bastard, legitimized or not, they might try to sell me to the highest bidder." Arya's jaw tightened. "We won't let that happen." The hound spat into the dust. "If we're going to keep heading north, maybe best to avoid inns altogether." They pressed on, following winding paths through farmland left fallow by war. Days blurred together. Jon's shoulder wound slowly improved, though it still pained him to raise his sword arm too high. Arya's spirit remained taut, as though coiled for a fight that might come at any moment. The hound, true to his gruff nature, never ceased to remind them how foolish it might be to keep wandering in these dangerous lands. Eventually, they neared the great hills that separated the riverlands from the neck. Boggy terrain rose up before them, thick with mosquitoes and stunted trees. The air turned humid and oppressive, and water pooled in every hollow. Beyond that lay Moat Cailin, the ancient fortress that guarded the northern approach, a fortress that had once belonged unequivocally to the Starks. But with the Boltons now in league with the Lannisters, it was likely no longer safe ground. They found a patch of drier land to camp on, using the cover of a gnarled cypress. Fireflies flickered among the reeds. The night air buzzed with insects. They spoke quietly. Jon said, "If Moat Cailin is held by the Boltons, we can't just ride through. We'll need to skirt around or find some secret path. The neck is a labyrinth of swamps." The hound frowned. "You know the way?" Jon shrugged, wincing as it pulled on his injury. "Not well, but the Crannogmen do, and many of them are loyal to House Reed, who were sworn to my father. If we can find them—" Arya leaned forward, eyes kindling with hope. "The Reeds? Jojen and Mira were our friends at Winterfell. Maybe we can talk to them." John felt a twinge of pain at the mention of the reeds, remembering how the quiet green dreams of Jojen had unsettled him once. He had never fully understood their powers, but he knew House Reed was fiercely loyal to the Starks. "They might help us," he agreed softly, "if we can locate them." The hound rolled his eyes. "Crannogmen, half-feral swamp rats. If that's our best hope." Arya shot him a glare. "They're braver than you think." John placed a calming hand on Arya's shoulder. "We need caution. The Boltons may have patrols, but if we're careful, we might slip past. I know a few old stories about hidden causeways, or at least we can try." A plan took shape. They would angle northeast, skirting the main road to Moat Cailin, and seek contact with Crannogmen near the Fever River. From there, perhaps they could gather news, learn whether the Boltons truly held the entire north, or if any loyal bannermen still resisted. They set out at first light, leading their horses through half-flooded paths where brackish water rose to their ankles. Clouds of gnats swarmed about their faces, forcing them to sweat continuously. The stench of rotting vegetation clung to the warm air. More than once, the horses balked at sinking in muck, and the travelers had to coax them forward. By midday, they were drenched in sweat, mud-streaked, and thoroughly miserable. "I hate this bloody swamp," the hound growled. "Should have gone west." John swallowed a retort, focusing on scanning the horizon for movement. Moss-draped trees loomed overhead, their branches forming a dense canopy. Visibility was poor, and any number of foes could hide behind the thick trunks or in the murky water. They pressed on. At times, they followed faint game trails. Once, they waded through waist-deep water to circumvent a collapsed causeway. Arya's mare stumbled, nearly pitching her into the water, but the hound caught the horse's reins. As dusk approached, they emerged onto a slightly higher ridge, where the ground was firmer. John halted, motioning for silence. He had spotted something ahead, a flicker of movement among the reeds. Arya stilled, eyes narrowing, and the hound tensed, hand drifting to his sword. From the gloom, 3 figures materialized, bows in hand. Their clothing was mottled green and brown, perfect camouflage for the swamp. Each wore a curious frog spear strapped across the back. They were Crannogmen. One, a short young woman with long damp hair, raised her bow, arrow-notched. "Halt!" she commanded. Her accent was soft and lilting. "State your purpose." John lifted both hands, showing he carried no weapon in them. "We seek House Reed," he said, heart pounding. "My name is John." "John." He hesitated, uncertain if he should say Snow or Stark. "Son of Eddard Stark. This is my sister, Arya Stark. Son of Ned Stark." The woman's eyes went wide, skepticism etched in every line of her face. She looked at Arya. "Arya, we heard rumors you might have died at Harrenhal or during the war." Arya bristled. "I nearly did, but I'm alive and I am Arya Stark." The Crannogmen exchanged glances. One stepped forward, a man with a wiry build, chest bare under a ragged vest. "What proof do you have?" he asked, voice low. "The neck is not safe. Bolton men roam here." John knew they had no letter, no token. Arya's face is proof enough for those who knew her. As for me, I have only my word. But I can tell you tales of Winterfell, of House Reed's visit there. I remember your lord's children, Jojen and Mira. They came to share in my father's hospitality. His words were cut short by a sudden cry from Arya. Jojen had green dreams. He predicted things. He told Bran something that frightened him. The Crannogmen stiffened. One lowered his bow. The young woman with the damp hair studied Arya's face closely, then exchanged a look with her companions. "Jojen Reed did have green dreams," she allowed softly. "We believe you, or at least we'll bring you to our lord. He can judge." The man nodded, though he kept a cautious stance. "You'll come with us. If you are who you say, you'll be welcomed. If not..." He let the warning hang in the air. John exhaled relief. "Thank you. We mean no harm. We're only seeking refuge, and news of our younger brothers if you've heard anything." Bran and Rickon Stark. The Crannogmen hesitated. Then the woman's expression softened with sympathy. We heard rumors that Theon Greyjoy seized Winterfell, that the boys were killed, or maybe not. Only the gods know. Arya's face twisted in grief, but she clung to hope. We think they're alive. The Crannogmen nodded without comment, then motioned for Jon and the others to follow. As they led the way, the hound muttered curses under his breath, but complied. They moved deeper into the swamp along paths that seemed invisible to Jon's eyes, and after a time, the ground rose enough that small hillocks formed. On one such hillock stood a modest Crannog fort, a series of huts surrounded by a palisade of sharpened stakes. A causeway of woven reeds connected it to the path. Dozens of Crannogmen bustled about, women gutting fish, men weaving nets, children darting behind huts. They all paused to watch the newcomers approach. Whispers raced through the crowd. "A Stark!" Jon caught. "Ned's boy!" Another voice murmured. "Dark times? Could it be?" In the center of the settlement, a tall, spare man with graying hair emerged. He wore patched leathers, frog spears strapped across his back, and an air of quiet authority. Jon recognized him from a distance. This was Howland Reed, Lord of Greywater Watch, Ned Stark's old friend, the man who had been with him at the Tower of Joy. Howland Reed approached slowly, studying Jon's face. "This must be some trick," he said softly. "Word reached us that the Starks were all but destroyed. The Red Wedding, the children gone." He looked at Arya, blinking in astonishment. "Is it truly you?" Arya swallowed, tears glinting in her eyes. "Yes, I'm Arya. My father always spoke fondly of you, Lord Reed." She bowed her head, and Howland's eyes flicked from her to Jon. "And you," he murmured. "You have the look of Ned, the black hair of your mother perhaps, but the face, the eyes. He once told me he had a bastard son. I see you carry yourself like a Stark, though with a heavy burden." Jon dipped his head, fighting an onrush of emotion. "My lord, it's true. I was raised as Jon Snow, but I carry Ned Stark's blood." Howland exhaled, exchanging a look with his daughter, who must have been the young woman with the bow. "Welcome, then, to our refuge. We'll talk inside. These are not safe times, but we owe the Starks a great debt. You will find sanctuary here." He led them to a large hut near the center of the settlement. Sandor Clegane drew suspicious looks from the Crannogmen, but none challenged him openly once they saw he accompanied Arya and Jon. Inside, the hut was smoky from a small hearth. Reed invited them to sit on mats woven of reeds and grasses. Jon settled slowly, relieved to rest. Arya sat beside him, and the hound stood near the entrance, arms folded. Howland Reed offered them bowls of fish stew, pungent with herbs. They ate in silence a moment. Then Howland turned a keen gaze upon them. "Tell me everything," he said softly. "We've heard rumors, but not the truth." Jon recounted the Red Wedding in terse detail, how they had been betrayed, how Robb and Catelyn fell, how he himself was taken captive by Roose Bolton and escaped with Arya's help and the hounds. Then he explained the existence of King Robert's decree legitimizing him, how it had fallen into Bolton's hands. As he spoke, Reed's expression grew more and more grave. "It's worse than we feared," Howland murmured. "The Boltons hold the north as wardens for the Lannisters. That treacherous bastard Ramsay roams the countryside, terrorizing small folk. Moat Cailin is indeed in Bolton hands. They've forced or coerced many northern lords to bend the knee." Arya's voice trembled with rage. "They will pay for their crimes. We have to fight them, don't we? The North belongs to the Starks." Howland's face was lined with sorrow. "Aye, that's what my heart says. But the Boltons have the advantage of the Lannisters' backing. And your brother's army was scattered or slain. To rise up now, with only a handful of loyal houses and the Crannogmen, it would be a dire fight." Jon drew a shaky breath. "My father always said you were a man of deep wisdom. If there's a way to free the North, we want to try. But we can't wage open war with no resources." Howland gazed into the fire flickering in the hut's hearth. "Your father saved my life once. We fought side by side long ago. I owe him and I owe the Starks. If there's even a chance to restore you, I will stand with you." He glanced at Arya, eyes heavy with regret. "I only wish we had found you sooner, or saved Robb." Arya's jaw clenched, tears threatening. "I tried. I was so close." Howland placed a hand on her shoulder gently. "You survived. That is no small thing. The North needs every Stark who still lives." Silence stretched, broken only by the snap of flames. At length Howland stirred, looking at Jon. "Tell me more of Robert's decree. You believe if you had it, you could challenge the Lannisters' claims." Jon grimaced. "I'm not sure. The decree is incomplete, but it has Robert's seal. It legitimizes me as Jon Stark, recognized by House Baratheon. That might sway some lords in the south, or at least cast doubt on Joffrey's legitimacy. But Joffrey is dead now, or so we hear, and Tommen sits the throne with Tywin pulling the strings." Howland tapped his chin. "It still might matter. If the realm sees that Robert wanted a Stark Baratheon tie, they may question the entire Lannister claim. If we found enough powerful allies, we might force the Lannisters to relinquish their hold on the North." Arya's fists tightened in her lap. "But Bolton has the decree." Reed agreed. "We'd need to retrieve it, or, at the very least, remove Bolton from power." He shot the Hound a wary glance. "But we are only a handful here in Greywater Watch." The Hound snorted. "You'd need an army to storm the Dreadfort, and your swamp dwellers won't do it alone." Arya glared at him. "They're braver than any Sellswords." Howland lifted a hand for stalling argument. "Clegane speaks truly that we lack numbers for a direct assault. We must be cunning. The Neck is full of secrets, vantage points. We can harry Bolton's men, disrupt supply lines, rally northern houses that remain loyal. House Manderley in White Harbor might still side with the Starks if they believe a Stark lives. The mountain clans in the far north might also stand with you, if they can be reached." Jon nodded slowly, hope stirring. "If we move carefully, we might gather enough support to challenge them, or at least make the Boltons uneasy. But your own safety is paramount," Howland said firmly. "If the Boltons realize you're alive and in the Neck, they will come in force." Arya's eyes flashed. "We can handle ourselves." Howland studied her, then turned to Jon. "Your sister is brave, but young. Let me place a few of my best Crannog fighters with you. They know these swamps well. We can move your group north in secret, see if we can contact any loyal families. If fortune smiles, we'll build a hidden alliance." Jon felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Lord Reed. We'll accept all the help we can get." The Hound huffed. "I agreed to help this girl, not sign on to a fool's crusade. But if there's coin in it, or a chance to gut that bastard Bolton, I won't say no." Arya nearly spat at him. "We're not in this for your coin." A small, bitter grin twisted the Hound's mouth. "Then you'll starve, little wolf." Howland pressed a hand to his temple, clearly seeing the tension. "We can discuss the details later. For now, rest. You are safe in Greywater Watch." Thus began a new chapter in their journey. Over the next few days, they recovered, ate fresh fish and swamp plants, and learned the ways of the Crannogmen. Arya received a new set of boots more suited to wet ground. Jon's wound was tended with poultices of swamp herbs that reduced the swelling. The Hound grumbled about the constant damp, but grudgingly admitted the fish stew was tolerable. Howland Reed told them what news he had of the wider world. Tywin Lannister was now Hand of the King for young King Tommen, forging alliances with House Tyrell. Stannis Baratheon clung to Dragonstone but had lost the Battle of the Blackwater. Meanwhile, Ironborn raiders plagued the northern coasts. Roose Bolton had installed himself as Warden of the North, and his bastard Ramsay reigned from the Dreadfort, rumored to be even crueler than his father. Winterfell lay in ruins, mostly deserted save for Bolton men. The North bled. Arya burned with the desire to ride straight to Winterfell, but Jon insisted they proceed with caution. "We can't storm the castle alone," he said. "We'll gather allies. If there's any chance that Bran and Rickon are alive, we must find them. But we need strength first." Howland nodded. "Well spoken. Lord Manderley at White Harbor might be our best hope for a large-scale force. He was always loyal to your father, though Tywin likely tries to keep him in check. If we can get to White Harbor in secret, perhaps we can rally support. In the evenings, the Crannogmen showed Arya how to handle a frog spear. She took to it quickly, though she still preferred her slender sword. Jon, for his part, spent hours leaning against a post by the water's edge, gazing into the distance. Sometimes he thought of Ygritte. His mind drifted to the memory of a fierce kiss in a cave, though in this altered timeline, that never occurred because he had never joined the Night's Watch. Yet some ghostly ache haunted him, as if his path in life might have led elsewhere. On the 5th day, Howland declared it time to move. He introduced them to several of his best scouts, lithe men and women who wore swamp-patterned cloaks. Under cover of darkness, they would begin their northward trek, hugging the wetlands and avoiding main roads. That evening, while final preparations were underway, Howland asked Jon to walk with him. They strolled along a raised walkway, torchlight dancing on the water below. "You know," Howland said, voice hushed, "your father never liked secrets, but he kept one about you. He never told me the details, but I suspect there is more to your heritage than a simple affair. Something about the Tower of Joy. I was there when we found your father's sister, Lyanna." Jon froze, heart pounding. "What do you mean?" Howland studied Jon's face. "Ned always insisted you were his son by some unknown woman, but I never believed it. It wasn't his way. Still, he never confided fully in me. Only hinted that protecting you was paramount, that Robert could never learn the truth." A thunderbolt seemed to strike Jon's mind. Could it be that Robert's decree legitimizing him was about more than a bastard's shame? But no, these were half-formed suspicions. "Are you saying I'm not his son?" Jon whispered, throat tight. Howland hesitated. "No, you are Ned Stark's son in all the ways that matter. But I suspect your mother was Lyanna, and your father might have been Prince Rhaegar Targaryen." Jon almost staggered. The very notion seemed impossible, an avalanche of consequences. "That would make me a Targaryen?" Howland's eyes flicked around, ensuring no one was eavesdropping. "Keep your voice down. I don't know for certain, but the timeline fits. Lyanna was betrothed to Robert, but she was spirited away by Rhaegar, or so the songs say. Then the war ended with her dying in your father's arms at the Tower of Joy. The day we found them, Ned carried a newborn babe. He made me swear never to speak of it. The babe had dark hair, but Targaryen blood does not always yield silver hair. If it's true, then Robert would have destroyed you to end the Targaryen line. So Ned pretended you were his bastard." A wave of nausea and confusion washed over Jon. If this was the truth, it changed everything he thought he knew. Ned Stark, not his father by blood, but rather his uncle. Lyanna was his mother. Rhaegar Targaryen, the Dragon Prince, his father. Yet Ned had raised him as a Stark, and Robert had unwittingly legitimized him. How could that be? Jon whispered, trembling. "All this time, my father, Lord Eddard, never told me." Howland placed a comforting hand on Jon's arm. "He was protecting you, and we must continue to do so. Roose Bolton and Tywin Lannister cannot learn you have Targaryen blood, or they will brand you a threat. You saw what happened to Rhaegar's other children. The realm might see you as a claimant to the Iron Throne. That could provoke more war." Jon felt as though the ground beneath his feet had vanished. "I never wanted a throne. I never even wanted all this. I just wanted to serve House Stark." Howland squeezed his arm. "Then think of yourself as a Stark, for that is how you were raised. But keep this secret. If you choose to reveal it one day, if you believe it might help the realm, you must do so with utmost care. For now, let us focus on freeing the North." Jon nodded slowly, mind spinning. A fierce, complicated swirl of emotions tore at him. Grief for Ned, love for the father who had raised him, confusion about his birth parents, fear of what might happen if the world knew. "I understand," he managed. Howland nodded and, with a final pat on Jon's shoulder, walked away. Jon remained on the walkway, staring out over the dark swamp waters, heart pounding like a war drum. He did not know if he could truly accept this new identity. Perhaps it was a rumor or a half-truth, but the possibility burned in him, rearranging all he thought he knew of who he was. He stood there a long time until Arya came looking for him. She found him gazing into the distance, face drawn. "Jon?" she asked quietly. "What's wrong?" He turned to her, eyes flickering with conflict. But he could not share this new revelation with her yet. Arya had endured so much already, lost so many illusions. He forced a small smile. "Nothing, just thinking about the journey ahead." She searched his face, then placed a hand on his. "We'll be all right, as long as we stick together." Jon nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes," he said softly. "We Starks must stick together." He almost choked on the word Starks, that swirl of truth and deception echoing in his mind. But he clasped Arya's hand, feeling the warmth and reassurance of her presence. At dawn, they set out with a small band of Crannog scouts. 5 men and 2 women, each quiet and skilled at moving through the marshes. The Hound brought up the rear with a surly expression, still uneasy among these so-called swamp dwellers. They guided the horses carefully, making use of hidden causeways woven from reeds, floating patches of turf that held their weight if they knew how to step. Progress was slow. Occasionally, they glimpsed patrols along the horizon, silhouettes of mounted men bearing the flayed man banner of House Bolton, or the twin towers of House Frey. But the Crannog men knew how to keep to the shadows of the cypresses and tall grasses. They traveled mostly at dawn or dusk, resting during the day in concealed hollows. Between the heat, the bugs, and the constant fear of discovery, it was grueling. But Arya found a strange sense of purpose in it. She practiced with her spear and needle under the Crannog men's tutelage, learning to move silently across boggy ground. Jon, still healing, focused on sword drills that didn't strain his shoulder too greatly. The Hound remained taciturn, though he occasionally cursed under his breath, complaining about the damned stench of rot. One day, as they crept through a watery thicket, they spotted a small Bolton patrol, 4 men on horseback, led by a lanky officer wearing a half-cloak with the flayed man sigil. Jon's heart pounded as he recognized a face among them. A guard from the twins, a man who had jeered at him when he was in captivity. Arya glanced at Jon, a silent question in her eyes. The Crannog leader motioned for them to lie low. They parted the reeds just enough to watch the riders pass, water sloshing around the horses' hooves. One of the men complained loudly, "Why do we have to come to this God's cursed swamp? If the bastard wants to chase ghosts, let him do it himself." The officer barked back, "Shut it. Lord Bolton says the Stark bastard may be lurking here. They're offering a reward for any who bring him in alive." Jon's stomach clenched. He exchanged a look with Arya. The men were actively hunting him. The patrol moved on, missing the hidden watchers among the reeds. When they were safely out of earshot, Arya hissed, "We could have attacked them. For men only. We could have gotten information." The Crannog leader shook his head. "For men. For crossbows, perhaps. We might have one, or we might have lost some of us. Better to stay hidden." Jon agreed, though part of him longed to avenge what was done to Robb and Catelyn. "We must be wise," he told Arya softly. "We can't risk our mission for small victories. Every day we remain free, we gain strength." Arya pursed her lips but nodded reluctantly. They trudged onward. Eventually, the neck gave way to slightly higher ground as they neared the region south of White Harbor. The Crannog men parted ways, returning to their hidden fortress after ensuring Jon and Arya would find the path to an outpost of House Manderly's scouts. The Hound, faced with the prospect of encountering more well-armed soldiers, seemed torn between leaving and staying. "If you were wise," the Hound said to Arya, "you'd turn back with me, go somewhere quiet, live out your days in peace. These northern lords, they'll get you killed all over again." Arya's glare could have melted stone. "I'd rather die avenging my family than hide away. If you're afraid, then go." The Hound gave a derisive snort, but for some reason, he stayed. Whether it was gold he still hoped to earn or some lingering sense of duty to Arya, Jon could only guess. The land here was open fields and rolling hills, with a few scattered farmsteads. White Harbor, the North's largest city, lay some leagues to the northeast, where the White Knife River emptied into the sea. House Manderley, led by Lord Wyman Manderley, had historically been stalwart allies of House Stark. But would that remain true under Bolton's watchful eye? They traveled by night again, taking advantage of the moonlight. At times, they spotted the glow of distant torches, likely patrols or guard posts. More often, they saw little but starry skies and heard only the rustle of grass in the wind. The ocean's tang drifted inland, mingling with the crisp northern air. It felt like coming home, yet everything was overshadowed by the knowledge that the Boltons, not the Starks, currently held dominion over these lands. One chilly dawn, they reached a wooded ridge overlooking a broad valley. In the distance rose the walls of a small holdfast. A banner snapped in the breeze atop the gatehouse. A white merman on a blue-green field, the sigil of House Manderley. Jon's pulse quickened. This must be one of their outposts, he murmured to Arya. The hound eyed it warily, scanning the walls for archers. They observed for a time, noting that the holdfast was lightly garrisoned. No signs of Bolton flags. That was encouraging. Carefully they approached. A pair of guards at the gate challenged them. "Halt! State your names and purpose." Jon dismounted, raising his hands to show he carried no drawn weapon. "I am Jon Stark," he said, letting the word fall. "We seek an audience with Lord Manderley." The guards exchanged startled looks, then eyed Jon's face. "Stark?" one repeated, bewildered. "We heard House Stark was—" Arya slid off her horse. "I'm Arya Stark, his sister," she said boldly. "We need to speak with Lord Wyman at once." The guards were clearly rattled, uncertain whether they faced an impostor or the genuine article. One hurried inside. The other fumbled with his spear, glancing at the hound suspiciously, but kept silent. Within minutes, a tall captain wearing Manderley livery emerged. He studied Jon and Arya with intense scrutiny. "If this is a ruse, it's poorly done," the captain muttered, though his voice shook. "But your faces. The girl does look like a Stark. And the man, he has Lord Eddard's bearing. Gods preserve us." Jon bowed his head. "We can offer proof in our knowledge of Winterf. LL in the stories we know. If you would allow us inside—" The captain sucked in a breath, then waved them forward. "Come, we'll see what the Castellan says." They were led into the courtyard, where men-at-arms gawked. Arya held her head high, meeting their stares with cool defiance. The hound trudged behind, hand near his sword hilt, as though expecting treachery. An elderly knight soon emerged from the holdfast's main hall. He introduced himself as Ser Barth Greenspear, Castellan for Lord Manderley in this outpost. Jon repeated his claim, explaining in broad strokes how they survived the Red Wedding, traveled through the Neck, and now sought Manderley's help to restore the North and avenge Ned Stark. Ser Barth was plainly astonished. "This, if it is true, then the gods have intervened. We had all but surrendered to the Boltons, though Lord Wyman is not a man who forgets old loyalties." Arya's eyes lit with hope. "So he will help us?" Ser Barth let out a heavy sigh. "I cannot speak for him, my lady. Lord Wyman remains in White Harbor, under the watchful eye of the Dreadfort spies, no doubt. He must play his cards carefully, or risk the lives of his people. Still, if he learns you are truly alive, he might risk open defiance. But we must be cautious." Jon nodded. "Will you send a rider to White Harbor?" The Castellan hesitated. "Sending a rider might be intercepted. Better if we bring you there ourselves, under secrecy. Lord Wyman should see you face to face. Only then will he believe." "Then let us go," Arya said. "We've no time to waste." The hound grunted. "Sneaking into a city. That's always gone well." Ser Barth considered. "We can arrange disguises, travel in small groups. The approach to White Harbor is well patrolled by Bolton men, but there are ways to slip inside if one knows the docks. We can do this in a day or two once we prepare." So they waited in the holdfast, gathering their strength. The men there treated Jon and Arya with a reverence that made Jon uneasy. Word spread quickly that Ned Stark's children had returned from the dead. At meals in the hall, soldiers regarded them with awe, quietly toasting the memory of Robb and Catelyn. Some men even knelt to Arya or Jon in private, pledging that if House Stark rose again, they would fight. The Hound watched all this with a grim silence, rarely saying more than a grunt. Jon found himself torn between gratitude and guilt. He did not feel worthy of their devotion, especially knowing that part of him might not even be Ned's son. But whenever the doubt gnawed at him, he recalled that Ned had raised him, and that was enough. He was a Stark where it mattered most. On the third day, they set off in a small band, disguised as common travelers. Ser Barth's plan was to approach White Harbor at dusk, slip in through a lesser-used gate, and arrange a quiet audience with Wyman Manderly. Their party consisted of Jon, Arya, the Hound, Ser Barth, and half a dozen trusted men-at-arms dressed as merchants or fishermen. They traveled by wagon on the main road, with baskets of salted fish as cover. The Hound muttered that it reeked. Jon had to admit the smell was unpleasant, but it served their purpose. Soldiers at a checkpoint waved them through after a cursory glance, more concerned with collecting a small toll than with rummaging through cargo. As evening fell, the looming walls of White Harbor came into view, bathed in the last rays of the setting sun. The harbor's waters glimmered, dotted with ships large and small. Towers and spires rose behind the walls, the city built of pale stone. Jon felt a twinge of excitement. He had never seen White Harbor before, though he had heard tales of its wealth and beauty. At the west gate, they queued behind a handful of other merchants. The guards wore Manderly livery, but a few men had the flayed man of Bolton on their tunics. Their presence reminded Jon how precarious the city's loyalty must be. When their wagon reached the gate, one of the Bolton guards peered under the canvas. Jon kept his hood low, heart pounding. Arya stared at her feet, cloak concealing her face. The guard wrinkled his nose at the fish stench, then waved them on. Inside the walls, they found a bustling city that still bore the scars of war. Blackened buildings where some conflict had raged, beggars in the streets, hungry-eyed peasants. Yet there was also trade, as merchants hawked wares from stalls, and fishmongers cried their catch by the waterfront. The smell of salt air and brine permeated everything. Ser Barth guided them through winding streets until they reached a side entrance to the Manderly estate. The new castle, so it was called. Guards let them in after a hushed conversation. Within moments, they were ushered into a small, private hall. At the far end stood Lord Wyman Manderly himself, an older man of immense girth, draped in finery, with a thick beard white as sea foam. He seemed to lean heavily on a cane, but his eyes were sharp. He looked Jon and Arya over in silence, disbelieving. His jowls quivered as he searched their faces. Finally, he let out a shuddering breath. "Merciful gods, you do have the look of Lord Eddard. And you, child," he said to Arya, voice trembling. "You are the very image of your lady mother when she was young." Arya's eyes flooded with tears at the mention of Catelyn. "Lord Wyman, it's really us." Manderly sank to one knee with surprising grace for a man of his size. "My lord, my lady, House Manderly has always served House Stark. If you call, we answer." Jon hastened forward, gently urging him to rise. "My lord, please stand. I'm no king. Wyman rose, tears glistening in his eyes. "Your brother was our king, and though he's gone, the blood of the wolf remains. If you command, I shall muster every man I can to free the North from these fiends. The Boltons, Walder Frey, Tywin Lannister, they have ground our honor into the mud. But we bided our time, waiting for a chance to strike back. Perhaps the gods have delivered that chance." Hope surged in Jon's chest. Perhaps this was the moment House Stark could rise again. But caution tamped it down. "Lord Wyman, your city is under threat. If you openly defy the Boltons, they could crush you with Lannister help." Manderly's gaze hardened. "Let them try. White Harbor is not a wooden hamlet. It has walls of stone, strong gates, and a proud populace. But you speak truly, we must be cunning. There's talk that Stannis Baratheon has landed in the north. seeking to rally northern lords to his cause against the Lannisters. If we appear to ally with him too openly, the Boltons might strike. Yet, if you wish it, I can pledge men to you in secret, for a start." Arya said, "We want justice. The Boltons and Freys murdered my mother and brother. We can't let them rule." Manderly bowed. "Nor shall we, but we'll need a plan. As it stands, the Boltons hold Winterfell in ruin. The Freys hold the Twins, and Tywin Lannisters might looms over us all." Jon exchanged a look with Arya. "My lord, is there any sign of my younger brothers, Bran and Rickon?" Manderly's expression turned sad. "We've heard conflicting tales. Rumor says Theon Greyjoy killed them, but many believe that was a ruse. No one knows for certain. If they live, they might be hiding. Some whisper of mysterious sightings in the north, near the wall. Others say the Dreadfort." He shook his head. "I cannot confirm anything." Jon swallowed disappointment. "Thank you. We'll keep searching. For now, we need an army, or at least enough men to challenge the Boltons' hold." Wyman gave a solemn nod. "House Manderly can pledge a few thousand, if we gather our knights and bannermen. But we risk immediate retaliation if we muster them openly. The Boltons have more men, plus the support of the crown. We must be strategic. If we can arrange for Stannis to distract the Boltons from one side, and we strike from another, we might stand a chance. Or if we can rally the mountain clans, House Glover, House Mormont, and others who still remember their oaths to the Starks." Arya's eyes gleamed with determination. "We'll do whatever it takes." Jon nodded, though a pang of fear twisted in him. War again after the devastation of the Red Wedding. Could the North endure more bloodshed? Yet what choice did they have? The alternative was to let the Boltons rule unchallenged. "We must be cunning," Jon repeated. "And there's one more thing. Roose Bolton holds a decree signed by King Robert, legitimizing me. That might sway some southern lords if we could recover it, or at least prevent him from using it. We also fear he might have discovered other secrets about my parentage." Wyman's eyes widened. "Gods, that's a dangerous game indeed. If you were recognized as a legitimate Stark by Robert's decree, you might be able to claim fealty from certain Stormland or Crownland houses. But retrieving it from Bolton's clutches is no small feat." Jon's voice hardened. "We'll do what must be done. For now, though, we focus on building alliances in the north." Manderly pressed a hand to his large chest. "You can count on me. We'll do this quietly, step by step. The Boltons watch White Harbor, but I'll feed them half-truths while preparing in secret. And if Stannis truly marches from the wall, we might find a common cause." That night, Jon and Arya were given comfortable chambers within the Manderly manse. It was the first true bed either had slept in for months. Jon sank onto the soft mattress, exhaustion claiming him. But in his dreams, he saw images of Ned Stark's face, and beyond that, the ghostly visage of a silver-haired prince, Targaryen. He woke with a start, heart hammering. Morning brought new challenges. Lord Wyman wasted no time sending out coded messages to lords he trusted, testing the waters of their loyalty. Jon and Arya remained hidden within the estate, for fear that word of their presence might leak out to Bolton spies. The Hound lurked about uncomfortably, occasionally sneaking off to sample the city's ale, returning in a foul mood. Slowly, over a fortnight, the seeds were sown. House Glover, harried by Ironborn near Deepwood Motte, might be convinced to ally if promised relief. House Mormont, led by the fierce Lady Meege or her daughters, was rumored to still hold loyalty to the Starks. House Serwyn, House Tallhart, House Hornwood. Some had lost lords or heirs in the war, leaving them vulnerable to Bolton intimidation. Manderly's envoys carried messages, quietly building a network of those who might rebel once they believed it was truly possible. Arya grew restless, impatient with the politicking. Jon tried to reassure her. "We can't win alone. We need the other houses. We learned that from Robb's mistakes." Arya looked away, tears threatening. "I just want to punish them," she whispered. "Bolton, Frey, all of them. They deserve to die." Jon placed a hand on her shoulder. "They will, But first we must be smart. Meanwhile, rumors trickled in that Stannis Baratheon had indeed arrived at the wall, rallying the Night's Watch to defend against wildlings or worse. Some northern clans were gravitating to Stannis' side because he claimed to be the rightful king who would free them from Lannister rule. The Hound scoffed at the notion. Stannis never gave a fig for the North before. He's just using it as a stepping stone. Jon wondered if, ironically, Stannis might become an ally. Even if Stannis pressed a southern claim, perhaps they could unite to oust the Boltons. The question was how to ensure the North's freedom afterward, or at least Stark rule. One evening, as Jon perused a map with Lord Wyman in a private solar, a breathless messenger arrived. The man bowed deeply. "My lord, the Dreadfort's men approach the city. A sizable host, 100 strong or more. They ride under Roose Bolton's banner, with flayed men in their vanguard." Wyman's expression darkened. A show of force. They must suspect something. Jon tensed. "We must hide. If Bolton himself is coming, we can't let him see me or Arya." Wyman nodded. "Go to the cellar vaults, there's a hidden chamber behind the barrels. I'll greet the bastard of the Dreadfort if he's here, or if it's Roose himself. Ser Barth, take them." Jon and Arya hurried out, hearts pounding. The Hound fell in behind them, hand on his sword. They descended a winding staircase, passing rows of wine barrels and crates. In the far corner, a small door was concealed behind sacks of flour. Ser Barth pried it open, revealing a cramped chamber lit by a single lantern. "In here, quickly," he urged. Jon and Arya slipped inside, joined by the Hound and 2 of Manderly's men. The space was hot and musty, but at least it was hidden from prying eyes. They settled in, hearts drumming in their chests as footsteps above signaled the arrival of Bolton men. Muffled voices drifted through the floorboards. Jon strained to listen. He heard Lord Wyman's booming greeting. "Welcome to White Harbor, my lord. An unexpected pleasure." Then a cool, soft voice responded. A voice Jon recognized from the twins. Roose Bolton, that deadly calm. "Lord Manderly," Roose said. "Word reached me of suspicious activity in your city. I came to see for myself." Manderly's tone remained polite but guarded. "You're always welcome here, Lord Bolton, as Warden of the North." Jon clenched his fists, recalling how Roose had stabbed Robb. Arya trembled with rage. The Hound's mouth twisted in disgust, but he remained silent. A few moments later, another voice spoke, one that set Jon's teeth on edge. Ramsay Bolton, the bastard of the Dreadfort, laced with sadistic glee. "White Harbor is so grand," Ramsay drawled. "Shame if anything unfortunate happened here." Manderly responded with measured civility. "We keep the king's peace." A scraping of chairs, more muffled words. Jon could only guess what was happening, but it seemed clear that Bolton suspected some conspiracy. Time crawled by in that stifling chamber. Arya's eyes were locked on the floor, as if she were picturing Ramsay's throat under needle's point. Suddenly, heavy footsteps approached the cellar, accompanied by a guard's voice. Light filtered beneath the hidden door. Jon's heartbeat thundered. If Ramsay or Roose came down here, they might discover the door. The footsteps paused. A grunt, a rustle of barrels being shifted. Jon's breath caught. The guards seemed to be searching the cellar. Then Wyman's voice echoed down the stairs. "You'll find no hidden rebels among my salted fish, Lord Bolton. But you're welcome to look." A tense moment passed. Then the footsteps receded. Arya closed her eyes, relieved. Time stretched on. Eventually, the faint rumble of voices moved upstairs. Jon could make out only fragments. Bolton's cold remarks, Manderly's placating replies. After what felt like hours, the footsteps faded entirely. The muffled clamor of gates opening signaled that the Bolton host was leaving. Ser Barth eased the hidden door open. "They're gone," he whispered, "though they'll remain in the city a day or two, quartered in the outlying inns and stables. Lord Bolton claims he's on his way to Moat Cailin." Jon, Arya, and the Hound emerged, blinking at the lantern light. Their limbs were stiff, their throats dry. Up the stairs, they found Wyman Manderley, sweat shining on his brow. "They suspect me," Manderley said grimly, "but they have no proof. Roose demanded I send men to reinforce him at Moat Cailin, to ensure peace in the north. I'll comply for now, send a token force. But we must hurry with our plans, before he grows bolder." Arya's face was pale with fury. "He was right above us," she hissed. "If I'd had my way, I'd have put a dagger in him. Then we'd all be dead," the hound grunted. Jon placed a calming hand on Arya's shoulder. "Our time will come," he said quietly. "We'll make sure of it." So they stayed in White Harbor, hidden from Bolton's men, finalizing plans with Lord Wyman. Little by little, ravens flew in from scattered northern lords. Small hints of support, messages of caution, pleas for secrecy. The north was still reeling from the Red Wedding, but many had not forgotten the Starks. Finally, with a workable plan in place, Manderley's men gathering in the countryside under pretenses of local levies, House Glover preparing to retake Deepwood Motte from the Ironborn, and quiet feelers sent to House Mormont, Jon and Arya prepared to depart. Their goal: travel to the Wall, meet with Stannis Baratheon if the rumors held true, and attempt to coordinate an uprising from both ends of the north. Lord Wyman placed a pudgy hand on Jon's arm. "You have my word. When the time comes, White Harbor's banners will rise for House Stark, for the memory of your father and brother, for the hope of a free north." Jon bowed his head. "Thank you, my lord. We will not forget." Manderley bowed in return, a tear in his eye. "Go quickly, and may the gods guide you." Arya looked up at the old lord. "When we come back, it'll be with an army to destroy the Boltons." A fierce smile crossed Manderley's face. "I look forward to that day, my lady." Thus, Jon Stark, Arya Stark, and Sandor Clegane set out once more, slipping through a postern gate at dawn to avoid curious eyes. They rode north along the coastal roads, planning to cut west toward the King's Road eventually. The journey would be long, the risks many, but they bore renewed purpose. Snow fell in light flurries as they traveled, harbingers of the winter that loomed on the horizon. Jon wondered if they could raise the north before the worst snows set in, or if the realm would be plunged into a new wave of bloodshed. Either way, they pressed on, for there was no returning to the easy innocence of their youth. They were wolves in a land of betrayal, but the wolves were gathering. House Stark was not yet done, and though Jon carried a deeper, more perilous secret in his veins, for the moment, he was content to fight as a Stark, and to light the fire of rebellion in the face of the flayed man who dared claim his birthright. They rode into the cold wind, cloaks snapping, hearts resolute. Far behind them, White Harbor's walls receded into the morning mist. Far ahead lay the Wall, Stannis, the promise of a new alliance, and perhaps the final confrontation with Roose and Ramsay Bolton. In all of Westeros, few would have guessed that the battered bastard from the Red Wedding would rise to challenge the Wardens of the North, and perhaps eventually the Iron Throne itself. But destiny, like winter, has a will of its own. If the gods were just, then soon the flayed banners would fall, and the dire wolf would once again reign over the North, legitimized not only by royal decree but by the blood spilled in its name.